Chapter 24-35. The expressions of the few old monsters of the Mahayana realm changed drastically. They looked at each other with fierce eyes. Today, they came to test whether Wen Jinqian was possessed or not. One of them got an item from the abyss of the demons. No matter how noble the cultivators were, all of them were extremely fierce. This thing was the luck reversal array. It was extremely vicious. It could deprive a cultivator of their luck and ability and turn it into their own use. If Wen Jinqian was not possessed, then they could only continue to wait. And if he was possessed, it meant that there was a weakness in his temperament, and there would definitely be an opportunity to take advantage of it. They had been waiting for too long in the Mahayana realm. Wen Jinqian, on the other hand, soared into the sky. In just 700 years, he directly reached the strength in front of Soar. And he also blocked the second lightning tribulation. Who wouldn't be jealous of this ability? Not jealous. Not coveting. The longer they cultivated, the more they knew that a genius like Wen Jinqian was rare, depriving him of his luck. Even if he became a demon, he had to fight. This was also the reason why they rarely joined forces. Because they wanted to share Wen Jinqian's ability and talent equally. When the lotus petals attacked, the few old monsters blocked them. They took the opportunity to throw out a reversal array. Wen Jinqian saw the terrifying array enveloping him. He stood calmly, and a trace of understanding appeared in his eyes. So that's how it is. I was wondering why you suddenly thought of upholding the right path. Wen Jinqian sighed and slowly closed his eyes. His long and thick eyelashes suppressed the coldness and sloppiness in his red eyes. It was unknown where the gigantic golden lotus came from. It broke through the center of the reversal array. The array desperately absorbed spiritual energy. It was born to deprive spiritual energy. The more spiritual energy, the happier it was. Even the few old monsters were pleasantly surprised. Because they knew the effect of the array. The more spiritual energy, the more powerful the array would be. Wen Jinqian intended to use his huge spiritual energy to attack the array. It was a wrong calculation. But very soon, everyone's expression turned sluggish. Because the array gradually became difficult to operate. As if it had eaten too much, the speed at which it absorbed spiritual energy was unable to keep up with the influx of spiritual energy. Wen Jinqian stood calmly in his red robes. Behind him, the little fox was wearing a red veil. She seemed to be a little curious as she tilted her head but couldn't see anything. It was boundless, covering the entire sky and earth. It was all spirit energy. It was suffocating. The reversal formation suddenly stopped with a creak. At this moment, Wen Jinqian slowly opened his eyes and smiled gently. It seems that this thing doesn't work very well. It is said that demons like sacrifices the most. Why don't you all become sacrifices and see if this thing can continue to function? Several old monsters of the Desheng stage couldn't believe it. It was too scary. They had already overestimated Wen Jinqian's ability. But he didn't expect that the difference of a realm could be so great. It was all because no one had reached the strength of Soar in the past 10,000 years. Everyone could only guess at Wen Jinqian's ability, but they never felt that his ability was invincible. After all, Wen Jinqian had never done anything earth-shattering. After a long time, everyone naturally looked down on Wen Jinqian. They also felt that they were particularly objective. Wen Jinqian gently raised his hand, his fingertips sparkling like jade. Lotus flowers fluttered everywhere, and the strange fragrance was so strong that it made people feel ominous. A huge force attacked the people outside the door. High Lord Blue Phoenix was the first to bear the brunt, and her body was shattered by the force. But Wen Jinqian seemed to see something through High Lord Blue Phoenix. Full text download / collect below to record this reading record. Chapter 2436. He frowned slightly, and a trace of abnormality flashed in his eyes. And during this short pause in time, the remaining few old monsters who had been forced into a corner had no way out. Suddenly, they self-destructed collectively. The power of the huge vortex exploded the protective array of the Heavenly Gate sect. The reversal array was also activated again. A dark abyss appeared in the middle of the array. There was too much power, and the abyss of demons was blown out. If it didn't work, everyone would be sucked in. Once they entered the abyss, they wouldn't be able to come out. When Jinqian stood in the middle of the array, he was actually a little exhausted. But the crack in the abyss had to be repaired. Otherwise, the Heavenly Gate sect would be directly sent into the abyss. He stretched out his fingertips and used the last bit of his strength to slowly close the abyss crack. This power shocked everyone. After killing a few old monsters in the Mahayana realm, he still had the strength to fight with the reversal array. What kind of power was this? It was simply the same as heaven and earth. Seeing that the abyss was about to close, the little fox behind him suddenly asked softly, "Husband, what's above our heads?" When Jinqian's finger paused. After a moment of silence, he said, "The reversal array. I'm now the eye of the array. As long as you kill me, my ability will be given to you." There were only 2 of them in the array. If he really died, his power would be given to the little fox. Wei Wei Bai seemed to be curious, but also seemed to understand. "So that's how it is. Do I kill you like this?" A sword pierced through Wen Jinqian's back and through his heart. It was a good sword. It was thin and light. He had picked it out of the Heavenly Gate sect's mystic realm for a day. No matter who held this sword, they could kill gods and destroy immortals. Immortal level high grade, the only killing weapon that could unleash its greatest power without selecting a realm. He thought that the little fox was so weak, so he had to protect her well. But he didn't expect that the first person this sword drank blood would be him. When Jinqian saw the memory of High Lord Blue Phoenix, which was a relatively deep memory before she died. In that memory fragment, he saw the aura of the little fox. He had branded his aura on her body. So he was too familiar with her scent. High Lord Blue Phoenix thought that she had noticed that he had become a demon. Actually, it was the little fox who told her. This was just a small trick, but it should be very difficult for the little fox. Not only did he have to create illusions, but he also had to spend a lot of effort to deceive others and leak the news that he had turned into a demon. He was worried that she would be bullied. When did she become so good at protecting herself? When Jinqian's voice was hoarse. Blood gushed out from the corner of his mouth, staining the youth's fair face red. It was mournful and calm. Only his red eyes looked like they were about to cry. He asked Little Blue Phoenix Little 7. Bai Weiwei was practically lying on his back. She gently pressed her face against his back, and her bright red lips hooked up into a gorgeous, cold smile. "Because I'm not called Little 7. I don't like an old man who even gave me a name." She was innocent and cruel. "Our tribe's most powerful fox is the 9-tailed fox, but I am just a normal fox. To become a 9-tailed fox, I need a lot of power." When Jinqian's eyelashes were half closed, and more blood gushed out, the reversal array began to extract his source energy. This power would be sent into Little Blue Phoenix's body. She continued to complain innocently and cutely. "I didn't want to stay by your side at first, but that stupid thread of love made me unable to leave." When Jinqian's eyelashes trembled, he wanted to ask something, but in the end, he closed his mouth and couldn't ask anything. Her incomparably sloppy words were not purposeful and were just pure nagging. She didn't know what she was saying at all. How ruthless was she? Master wanted to drown me. I hate you to death, but you are powerful. I feel that if I seduce you, I will definitely become a powerful fox. Foxes were a race that seduced people for a living. If they seduced a powerful person, they could show off. And he was her trophy. The sword in Bai Weiwei's hand pierced deeper, and her hand was covered in blood. Her head covering had fallen to the ground. Her incomparably beautiful face was as delicate as his lotus flower. It was red with the smell of blood. I didn't expect to be able to obtain your strength. I will definitely become a nine-tailed fox in the future. She even asked softly, don't you think so, husband? The abyss opened again. Because more than half of Wen Jinqian's strength was taken away. It was all transferred into the little fox's body. But he didn't care. Instead, he asked gently, are they all fake? Was her fondness for him all fake? Wei Wei Bai was indifferent, like a naughty child who had broken a treasure. She said carelessly, yes, it's fake. After saying that, she let go of the sword and sent Wen Jinqian into the abyss with a palm. More than 70% of Wen Jinqian's strength was taken away by her. Now, her ability was enough to look down on all heroes. Before the abyss closed, she heard it. Ding, the male lead's blackening value is 90%. To read the full article at https://www.sashu.com to read on your phone, https://m.sashu.com//. Chapter 2437. The destruction of the reversal array and the aftermath of the explosion of the old monster at the Mahayana realm. There was also the leakage of the remnants of Wen Jinqian's power. All of the power in the area was swept up. It shook the array formation of the Heavenly Gates sect. The place that was jubilant and fairy-like just a moment ago. But now, it was a mess. Wei Wei Bai choked on a mouthful of blood. She asked, Tongzi, have you put away Wen Jinqian's power? He still planned to return the power that came from the reversal. So he couldn't use it directly on her. Just now, using Wen Jinqian's power to send him into the abyss was already her limit. The meridians and blood vessels in her body were about to explode. Old Monster Wen's power was too powerful. Just using a little bit of his spiritual energy was enough to force her to self-destruct. The system hugged the box and wanted to cry. There's too much spiritual energy. I'm worried that it will explode. He even specially bought a particularly strong storage box. In the end, when Jinqian's power became like this, it could explode at any time. If it really exploded, he and the host wouldn't need to be retarded. They could directly die. Wei Wei Bai was on the verge of collapse. Her skin began to bleed, and her whole body trembled. For the first time, the life guarantee that the system gave her couldn't stop the pain. No, it should be said that it was too painful. It was so painful that even the life guarantee couldn't suppress all the pain. Therefore, she could only bear the remaining pain. She was such a patient person, but she also endured until she wanted to die. Wei Wei Bai heard the sound of the lightning strike. The lightning fell into the abyss and went to kill Wen Jinqian. There were a total of 3 lightning tribulations. Breaking love, heartless, immortal meridians. Wen Jinqian had already experienced 2 lightning strikes. The 5th to 9th lightning strikes were all immortal meridians. After enduring the 9th lightning strike, the immortal meridians in Wen Jinqian's body could directly send him to immortality. Wei Wei Bai had no choice. Sending him to the abyss, the power of the lightning tribulation would be infinitely weakened. Otherwise, Wen Jinqian would be finished by the lightning strike in minutes. Moreover, Wen Jinqian still had 30% of his power in his body. Coupled with her heart-wrenching blow, it guaranteed that he was now in a sage state. He didn't want to be in love at all. The possibility of surviving the lightning strike had increased. She endured the pain and spent 30 days of her life points. He bought a lightning rod for him. This thing was very good. It could guide the power of lightning away. Come to think of it, she wasn't a demon. She was the only one who could abuse others and have after-sales service. He wasn't worried that when Jin Qian was really dead. Was the mission over? So to torture him, and to let him live. She racked her brains to plan. It was guaranteed that the final outcome would be a happy one. She gave him a good beating. In the end, it gave him a chance to succeed in killing Soar. Who else dared to say that she was vicious and thick-skinned, torturing people to death without burying them? Wei Wei Bai, who was still a good-for-nothing at the Golden Core stage, had given Wen Jinqian a slap. Not only did she reject his wedding, but she also threw him into the abyss of demons. The Golden Core stage had directly regressed to the Foundation Establishment stage. She propped up her body. She had to leave the Heavenly Gate sect as soon as possible. Otherwise, these disciples and grand disciples would come back and settle the score with her. But before she could take 2 steps, her vision turned black. System, I'm going to faint, I'm going to faint. The system covered its face speechlessly. Your vitality is about to be overdrawn, and you still have the strength to walk. Wei Wei Bai, if I don't walk, I'm going to die. Her betrayal of Wen Jinqian was seen by those who weren't blind. Should the betrayer stay in place and wait to be hacked to death? The system immediately rummaged through the trash can. I'll see if there's any space item that can send you away. Hold on. Unfortunately, she couldn't hold on. Chapter 2438. Xian Yi's sword was already attacking wildly. He shouted, Lan Qi, how dare you betray Master and betray the Heaven sect? Heaven and earth can forgive you, but not me. Everyone saw it clearly. The power of the reversal array was absorbed by Wei Wei Bai. Xian Yi attacked Wei Wei Bai with the determination to die. Because of Wen Jinqian's power, no one could win against Wei Wei Bai. But if he couldn't win, he wouldn't take revenge. Xian Yi's eyes were burning with hatred and tears of anger and sorrow. Even if he died, he would drag Wei Wei Bai to hell with him. How could he let her go? How could he face Master? But the next moment, a similar long sword hit Xian Yi's sword. It was Su San. He attacked Lord Blue Phoenix for the little fox. Similarly, he attacked his senior brother for the little fox. Xian Yi shouted in disbelief, Su San. Su San's face was pale, but his eyes were firm. He reached out and hugged Wei Wei Bai, who was covered in blood, and touched her body. She was in the Foundation Establishment realm. But there was no time to explain. Xian Yi had already started to arrange the array. He looked at them coldly and crazily. If you want to save her, you can sacrifice yourself to Master's soul. Wei Wei Bai almost rolled her eyes, but she was in so much pain that she grimaced. Wen Jinqian was not dead yet. Sacrifice my head. Wen Jinqian was such a shameless person. How could he choose such a righteous and impatient disciple? Su San held the little fox and arranged the sword array to block Xian Yi's array. Then he activated the transmission talisman and disappeared with Wei Wei Bai. Seeing them leave, Xian Yi gritted his teeth and shouted, Close the array of the Heaven sect. Drive away those who are not from the sect. Then he turned around and ran into the life lantern hole. He saw that his master's life lantern was still lit. But the flame was weakening. He immediately forced out his heart blood and injected it into the life lantern to give his master some power. Then he started to arrange the array to protect the lantern. as long as the life lantern was not extinguished. No matter how badly when Jinqian was injured, he could still survive. As for Su San and Lan Qi, the day of their master's return would be the day they lost their lives. An ice-cold wind blew as Su San stood on the flying sword. In his arms was a little fox wrapped in clothes. The fox was covered in blood and on the verge of death. He didn't even dare to hug her too tightly for fear of hurting her. The wounds on her body were all caused by her master's spiritual energy. It was a backlash caused by forcefully borrowing spiritual energy. Fortunately, the lotus petals left behind by his master began to inject new spiritual energy into the little fox's body to repair it. Otherwise, he wouldn't know how to save her. Wasn't he trying to steal master's power of providence in the reversal formation? With so much spiritual energy, it was enough for her to cross several big realms, even the Deshang stage should be there. Why did he fall to the foundation establishment stage? Su San lowered his head to look at the little fox that was covered in wounds. He knew that his second senior brother and fifth junior brother were chasing after him. Both of their abilities were specifically used to restrain sword cultivators. That was why he couldn't be chased. Once he was caught, he might be able to keep his life and await his master's judgment. It was certain that the little fox would be killed on the spot. This chase took him about 2 days to really get rid of it. He took her to escape into the human world, the cultivation world, and the small town at the edge of the abyss of demons. This was a lawless land. It was very difficult to find a person here. But it was also very dangerous. There were criminal cultivators everywhere, monsters disguised as humans, and all kinds of sinister demons. Su San was a famous prodigal before he started cultivating. /full text download / to facilitate your next reading, you can click on the comma. Chapter 2439. In this kind of place, he was like a fish in water. He disguised himself as a middle-aged uncle and took the red-haired little fox as a pet. He lived in a small inn. The little fox was still sleeping quietly, the petals hidden between her eyebrows emitting a faint light. They were constantly protecting her. Su San hugged his sword and sat quietly at the side looking at her. He was looking for a reason for himself. She might have had her reasons to betray her master. After all, she didn't become a powerful cultivator, and her body was seriously injured. But she did send her master into the abyss of demons. Since the abyss was sealed by hundreds of cultivators in ancient times. Anyone who entered this place never came out. So she still betrayed her master. Su San held the sword, the veins on the back of his hand bulging. The little fox suddenly frowned and muttered, "It hurts." Su San immediately let go of the sword and reached out to cover the lotus between her eyebrows, using the spiritual energy of the lotus to guide her to stop the pain. When she relaxed her eyebrows, he breathed a sigh of relief. Admit it, whether she betrayed or not. She wasn't a bad person. He liked her. The system stared at Su San for a long time, after confirming the attributes of a simp. Only then did he feel relieved and continue to eat the biscuits, while doing embroidery with his feet. The system also tried to detect where Wen Jinqian went. It found that other than being alive, nothing else could be seen. But the 3 lightning tribulations had indeed passed. As for the abyss not returning, that was fine, the host had already decided. In the end, Wen Jinqian couldn't return, and then she would become even more evil, to 100% evil. After the side mission was completed, she would go directly to the abyss to find him to attack the favorability. This was the host's incomparably simple plan. Every time the system saw the host make such a casual plan, such a casual attack plan, it felt that the host wasn't beaten to death by the male lead because the male lead was a good person. just as Wei Wei Bai was recuperating from her injuries and being a vegetative fox. In the dark abyss, countless lotuses bloomed. The red lotuses had completely changed color. They were completely stained black by the blood of countless abyss demons. In the lotus cluster, a huge black lotus began to change color. The immortal meridian entered the lotus. The heavily injured youth slowly opened his eyes. Golden light appeared in his red eyes. This was the power of the immortal meridian that entered. Under his long and narrow eyelashes, his half-closed golden eyes turned back to their normal black color. However, this kind of black was completely different from normal people's black. The darkness was sinister and exceptionally horrifying. The lotus continued to attack the abyssal demons. Demons that were terrifying to others were nothing more than nourishment to him. Under the nourishment of the immortal vein and the demonic creature's blood, the severely injured youth was recovering at a frightening speed. Finally, one day, a hand reached out from the lotus. Her fingertips were sparkling and translucent like jade, beautiful and flawless. The lightning tribulation also came. The 6th, 7th, and 8th lightning tribulations seemed to have sensed something. The power that broke through the abyss with all its might viciously attacked the person who was about to come out of the lotus. A power that could destroy the heavens and earth. More than half of the abyss was destroyed. Even the seal that imprisoned the abyss was directly destroyed. However, the power of the lotus blocked all of the lightning tribulation. The youth in the lotus flower finally stood up slowly with his naked body. His shiny black hair fell behind him. He casually grabbed a black robe made of black fog and draped it over his body. His face was still holy and calm. Because of the immortal meridian, he didn't look like he was possessed at all. Chapter 2440. The 9th Xian Lei couldn't fall for a long time. It was being suppressed by a terrifying power. Once it fell, he would either fail or become an immortal. Become an immortal, he. What was so good about becoming an immortal? After all, his little fox was still in this world. If he left, wouldn't that mean he wouldn't be able to catch her? When Jin Qian slowly turned his head, barefoot, he stepped over the lotus and walked towards the top of the abyss. Did she like being a powerful fox so much? She liked him so much that she would rather not have him. Then, a gentle smile slowly appeared on Wen Jinqian's face. Destroy everything that she likes. She liked power. He took out her spiritual root. She liked to charm others. He dug out her eyes. If she still wanted to use her body to escape, then she didn't want her body. Anyway, even if she only had a soul left. Even so, he still couldn't escape the imprisonment of his seal. Ding, the male lead's blackening value is 93. Wei Wei Bai, who was half dead from recuperation, twitched her ears. She still looked like a fox. After all, her injuries were too serious. She had been recuperating for a few months. It was still very difficult to turn into a human. The blackening value increased. It seemed that when Jin Qian felt that he couldn't escape the abyss, so he was angry. Wei Wei Bai covered her mouth with her claws and yawned lazily. She had been eating and waiting for death for a few months, but her blackening value was only 93. When it was 95, she would think of a way to go to the abyss to find Wen Jinqian. She would stimulate him and directly reach 100%. Then she would attack his favorability. Wei Wei Bai thought about a lot, but she didn't expect Wen Jinqian to come out of the abyss. Because the seal of the abyss was in the system's information. Almost no one could shake it. When Jin Qian was so seriously injured that he only had 20 to 30% of his strength left. He could protect himself, but it was almost impossible for him to come out. She was too lazy to return to her human form, so she was surprisingly lazy to yawn. When Su-san landed with the food box, he saw the little red fox lying by the window basking in the sun. She squinted her eyes lazily, her light-colored pupils clear and innocent. It had been 3 months since Master fell into the abyss. The little fox's wounds were almost healed. Her cultivation had also stagnated at the foundation establishment stage. His spirit meridians were damaged, and a crack had appeared on his inner core. These wounds were all injuries to the source, and would take many years to heal. However, with the lotus petals left behind by Master, the little fox would be able to heal even faster. Su-san did not ask her why she betrayed her master. If she wanted to say it, she would say it. When the little fox smelled the rice, it immediately pricked up its ears and looked at Su-san. Su-san calmly arranged the tableware for her. When he looked up, he saw a young girl leaning against the windowsill. The corners of her eyes were long and narrow. Her skin was pink, and her eyes were sparkling. They were as beautiful as peach blossoms. Su-san's movements paused, and then he looked away, not daring to take a second look. "Don't transform into human form so easily in the future," he said in a hoarse voice. Wei Wei Bai ran to the table with a smile and picked up the chopsticks. "I only transform into my human form when I'm eating. It's much more convenient this way." Su-san was as calm as usual, as if he didn't care, and said, "Eat." The little fox ate happily. It was like when he returned to the Heavenly Gate sect. At that time, she was the happiest person in the Heaven sect. Master had not taken a fancy to her. She was only a little fox who had a crush on Master. And he was the senior brother who would often roll his eyes at her, disdaining her weak strength. The past was like smoke, everything was blurred. Only the little fox's smiling face was still clear. After eating, Wei Wei Bai said, "I heard that my clan is in the north, I should go back." Su-san silently stared at her for a while before coldly saying, "Once you enter the clan, we can only separate. At that time, no one will protect you." The Fox clan was very mysterious. Most of them were women, and once they came out, they would bring disaster to the country. But most of the time, they would only silently cultivate, and very few people could see them. Once the little fox went back, he would not be able to follow her in. Foxes were xenophobic. Wei Wei Bai silently stared at Su-san for a long time. Then she said, "Senior brother, don't like me, I have someone in my heart." Su-san clenched his fingers and his face immediately turned red. "Who likes you?" Wei Wei Bai clapped her hands and said with a smile, "That's good, senior brother deserves someone better." Su-san suddenly asked, "Who do you like?" The little fox narrowed her eyes with a smile. In her clear eyes, it was so affectionate that it moved people. "Who else could it be? Of course it's my husband. Slash. Slash. Chapter 2441. My husband. Su-san didn't react for a while until he realized something. Wei Wei Bai turned back into a fox, as if she hadn't said anything. He stared at her blankly for a while. The person she liked was still her master. But why did she want to send Master into the abyss and betray him? Why did she lie to Master when she said she liked him? Su-san felt that there were more doubts in his mind. But looking at the little fox lying on the table, he didn't seem to be in high spirits. He thought for a long time, then lowered his head and said gently, "Okay, I'll send you back to your clan." Back to her clan. As long as the Heavenly Gate sect didn't try their best to kill them all, the little fox's safety could still be guaranteed. And he should go back to receive his punishment, or rather, to receive his death. Su-san reached out and gently picked up the little fox. "Let's hurry." All of his fondness was suppressed in this indifferent sentence. Wei Bei didn't say anything, obediently stayed in his arms, then closed her eyes. The system suddenly felt sad. Licking dogs, losing everything. It said, "You don't have to torture him like this brother doesn't need to become evil." Wei Bei said, "Isn't this for his own good? I'm going to the abyss, if he jumps in with me, won't he hinder me? No, I mean hinder his future." The first sentence was your real words, right? You're afraid that you can't pretend to be pitiful to win over the male lead with a burden. So kick him away after you've used him. Wei Bai explained perfunctorily, "We can't be too bad, we obviously have no feelings for him, of course we have to be cold and reject him to make him sad, so he can think better." System, this is called not being too bad. How bad are you going to be? Think about when Jinqian's end. It suddenly felt that the host's bad was boundless, vast and boundless. Before getting on the sedan chair, the host clearly said, "When someone came to find trouble, take the opportunity to pretend to be greedy for life and run away. At the same time, scold Wen Jinqian and make him become evil." But what did the host do? She would stab him to death with Wen Jinqian's gift. After that, she even scolded him. She straightforwardly and callously said that she didn't love him anymore. What a liar. In the end, he even sent him into the abyss with a palm strike. And this plan was only thought of by the host in 3 minutes. Was it easy for him to find a discount box? He thought that the side mission was stuck and could not be completed. He felt that what he should be worried about was the main quest. After all, scum was the host's old profession. Making a person turn black was actually the host's strength. Su San brought Wei Bai out of the small town and hurried day and night. The distance from here to the north was at least 5 days. They rushed to the bustling town on the first day. It was just enough for him to stay the night. Su San got a room. It was the little fox's. He set up a protective array formation for her. Then he slept on the roof of her room, watching over her. He slept on the roof every day, but the little fox didn't know. While they weren't looking, a few lotus flowers suddenly appeared in the inn's pool. It was bright red with a hint of black, strange and evil. When Jinqian, who was at the edge of the abyss, slowly opened his eyes. His eyes were cold and clear, and there was a beautiful red color in his dark eyes. He smiled gently. "Oh, found it." It was clearly such tender words. But it sent a chill down people's spines. His perfect white jade-like body walked out of the lotus flowers. He casually put on a black robe, lazily revealing the white skin on his chest, and just like that, he disappeared on the spot. To facilitate the next reading, you can click on Chapter 2442. It was still midnight in the inn. The little fox had a big heart and slept like a log. Su San stared at the stars, vigilant of his surroundings. Suddenly, his pupils constricted and he immediately sat up. But it was too late. A huge lotus flower appeared under him at some point in time and swallowed him whole. There was only a bright moon and stars on the roof. The person guarding the little fox, however, had disappeared to who knows where. Wei Bai suddenly realized that something was wrong. She fell asleep and found herself sitting on a lotus. The familiar hall and the tightly shut spirit stone door. A dreamy immortal mist lingered. The soft chirping of red-crowed cranes came from outside the door. She was wearing a lotus dress, her fingers were slender, and her silver hair was loose. She was like a fairy born in the lotus, confused and confused. Smash. System, blocked. My heart is dead. Wei Bai, something was wrong. It felt like a dream. If her mind wasn't clear enough, she would have been fooled by something if she realized that something was wrong. It didn't feel like a dream, but more like a deliberately created illusion. Wei Wei Bai maintained her usual pure and cute persona, holding her dress and pretending that she was still dreaming. She looked left and right and saw the lotus pond. When Jin Qian stepped out of the lotus, he was as pure as the moon, his slender figure wearing a white robe, his dark eyes gentle and calm. Wei Wei Bai raised her eyebrows, then a trace of confusion appeared in her eyes. "Ma master." When Jin Qian looked at her in confusion, as if he felt that something was wrong with her, he slowly walked over and grabbed her wrist. "Why is your cultivation so weak? Wait for me to refine some pills for you to strengthen your foundation." There was no betrayal. There was no killing. There was no hatred. It was as if everything was in the past. After a moment of confusion, Bai Weiwei seemed to realize that she was just dreaming. She smiled, her pure and innocent eyes carrying a trace of hateful casualness. "No need, master, I don't want your things." She wanted to torture him even in her dreams. Ding, the male lead's blackening value is 94. The blackening value increased too slowly. What was worse was, how did Wen Jinqian crawl into her dream? Did he come out of the abyss? Wen Jinqian's fingers paused, but he didn't say anything. He just said indifferently, "Don't be willful, little seven." Wei Wei Bai just had to go against him. "My name is not little seven. Wen Jinqian, the name you gave me is so unpleasant. I was born with a name." It was as if he knew that he was dreaming. The young girl's willful and reckless behavior, her fearless and ignorant stupidity was completely exposed. But her beautiful face, every frown and smile seemed to be tempting to fall into hell. Some people, or rather, some demons. They were born to do whatever they wanted, trampling on the sincerity of others, trampling on the love of others. There was not a trace of genuine repentance. This dreamland was the last chance he was giving her. When Jinqian's expression became gentler and calmer, he reached out and held her fingers. The girl's soft fingers were like budding flowers, tender and warm. "How I want to cut it off." "Then what is little seven's name?" He was careless and gentle, but he was holding back a monstrous viciousness and violence. Wei Wei Bai's light-colored eyes contained a ruthless and affectionate light. She smiled innocently, but her face was beautiful and exquisite. "Wei Wei Bai, I'm not called little seven. I'm called Lan Qi." When Jin Qian quietly lowered his head and gazed at her, his eyes were still affectionate and gentle, and his long and beautiful eyelashes were half closed. Download the mobile article at https://m/sashu.com. Chapter 2443. As if he didn't care at all, he smiled and said, "It seems that little seven really doesn't like the name Master gave her. How about I call you Wei Wei from now on?" Wei Wei Bai felt like she was in a dream and kicked him away even more recklessly. "Don't always pinch my hand. It hurts." Delicate and willful words, coupled with cold and disdainful eyes. It really made people feel cold just looking at her. When Jin Qian wasn't angry at all. He smiled faintly and looked like a gentleman. The elegant and beautiful young man even bent down slightly and held her slender and fragile ankle in a pious manner. She wasn't wearing shoes, and her pink toes were as cute as flower buds. When Jin Qian's smile gradually deepened. For some reason, his gentle smile had a hint of bewitchingly gorgeous feeling. His eyes also began to turn red, and a sharp and raging madness gradually appeared. "It seems that Wei Wei doesn't just dislike the name Master gave you. You probably don't like anything Master gives you." Wei Wei Bai's face was full of ignorance, and there was a stupid innocence on her gorgeous face. She chuckled and said, "How can that be? I like Master's power. When I'm done digesting Master's power, I can also soar. That way, I'll be the first fox in the world to become an immortal. Everyone will be envious of me." Wen Jinqian also laughed. "My little fox, you actually have such a big dream. Does that mean you can throw away Master's power when he has no more?" Wei Wei Bai tried to pull her foot back, but found that his fingers holding her foot were getting tighter and tighter. It hurt a lot. She frowned in confusion, as if she didn't know why she still felt pain in her dream. So when her willfulness came, she didn't care about anything and struggled. "Wen Jinqian, let go of me. You're annoying even in my dream." Wen Jinqian stared at her blankly for a while and finally sighed as if he had completely given up. "It seems that you really only want Master's power. I felt bad for you and thought you had difficulties." It turned out that he didn't. It was all because of the little fox's naivety to seduce an old man who had been lonely for 700 years. Then, when she got it, she didn't want it anymore. After all, he wasn't the one she wanted from the start. Who gave her the courage to do such a stupid thing? Maybe I should forgive her. Who asked her to be a child who didn't know the ways of the world? Even if it was bad, it was so righteous. It was so that he wanted to destroy her. He pinched Wei Wei Bai's ankle with his fingertips. The sharp pain made Wei Wei Bai shocked. A trace of doubt finally appeared in her blank and ignorant eyes. Then, he came to his senses. She stared at him, her voice trembling. Master." There was no trace of a smile on Wen Jinqian's gentle face. He looked up, and there was a hint of gold in his red eyes. It was the power of the immortal meridian. He was the first person who had entered such a deep demonic state and was still able to withstand 8 bolts of immortal lightning. Even the last bolt of immortal lightning refused to descend. It was also because of his strong obsession that prevented it from landing. After all, he had either become an immortal or failed. He couldn't even see the little fox. He didn't pull her into hell completely. How could she be worthy of his love for her? When Jinqian said softly, "Master is back. Are you happy, Wei Wei?" He crawled out of the abyss of demonic creatures that no one had ever come out of. It was all for her. She should be happy, because he loved her so much. All of the resentment, coldness, madness, distortion, and terrifying feelings. Chapter 2444. They were all connected to her. Wei Wei Bai's body began to tremble. "This isn't a dream, it's not a dream." When Jinqian tilted his head, an acute smile appeared on his youthful face. It was as if he was imitating Wei Wei Bai's innocent and childish appearance. "A dream, of course not. This is a mystic realm that Master specially built for you. This is an immortal realm built above the 9 heavens using the power of immortal thunder. Do you like it? In the cultivation world, no one could reach his realm. Of course, no one could go to such a high place." The familiar hall slowly collapsed, and countless black and golden spiritual auras surged out. The power of becoming an immortal and the power of becoming a demon intertwined into a terrifying scene. Behind the crumbling beauty was a desolate darkness. Countless black lotuses emitted a golden fluorescent light. They bloomed under their feet. She saw that they were in an unfamiliar palace. It was antique, with countless corridors and countless houses. But there was no one. It was so quiet and dark that it was terrifying. Only the gray lanterns emitted a faint light. When Jinqian pinched Wei Wei Bai's leg. Ever since Master fell into the abyss, he liked the darkness. "Wei Wei, you don't mind that the house Master built is darker, right?" Wei Wei Bai's face was filled with fear. She kicked him with all her might. "Let go, Wen Jinqian, let go of me." She even looked at Wen Jinqian's wrist. Sure enough, the red thread of love on his wrist had already pierced deeply into his flesh. It looked unusually painful. Wen Jinqian, on the other hand, smiled gently and affectionately, like a clear breeze blowing over the moon. Wei Wei, do you think that master needs to listen to you because the thread of love is deep into his bones? I want to listen to you too, but the power of this thread of love is too weak. After saying that, the thread of love on his wrist was suddenly shattered by a terrifying force. Wei Wei Bai suddenly felt a piercing pain. If the thread of love was forcefully removed, the female side would suffer a backlash. She clutched her chest and screamed in pain, curling up weakly. Wen Jinqian's fingers had already let go of her ankle, but his cold fingertips were slowly moving upwards. A morbid resentment appeared in his red eyes. Does it hurt? You're too delicate. Just a little pain and you're already so uncomfortable. Do you think that someone will pity you and then love you? For example, Su-san. Wei Wei Bai was in so much pain that her face turned pale. She sneered and said, "It was you who wanted to love me. What does it have to do with me? Why do I need to take responsibility?" When Jinqian paused, seemingly a little confused. He stared at her blankly for a long time before suddenly smiling. He felt that it was too funny. How could she be so ruthless? The power that was supposed to kill Su-san had disappeared. It turned out that Su-san was the same as him, there wasn't much difference. He was just an ant that she had willfully trampled upon. When Jinqian sighed, there was even some pity on his face. He said in a low voice, "You really are a child who never grows up." Ding, the male lead's blackening value is 95. Wei Wei Bai was in so much pain that she hammered the ground. When Jinqian, your blackening value can't increase like this. She was enough of a scumbag. She was heartless, unreasonable, and deserving of abuse. Why did her blackening value increase to such a level? Give me more effort, it's over 100. She immediately cried out and hugged Wen Jinqian's thigh to apologize. Brother, I love you. I betrayed you because I was stupid. In the end, she could only continue to be a scumbag. Otherwise, how could she be worthy of being tortured to 95? Damn you, you're still so gentle after being tortured to this extent. Are you a man? Bai Weiwei held on to her breath, wanting to continue to say a few more ruthless words. However, she heard him say faintly, "I still can't be cruel to you." Wei Wei Bai was confused. Her pale face was covered in cold sweat. She didn't seem to know what he was talking about. When Jinqian's red eyes contained a twisted and dangerous smile, but his expression was gentle and affectionate. "I'll give you a reminder first. Hurry up and run. If I catch up with you, I'll break your hand first, okay?" Bai Weiwei. At the /crossover system, Adonis, come here and read the full article at https://www.sashu.com. Download Transmigration system, Adonis, come here and read this on your phone, https://m/sashu.com. Chapter 2445. A huge, gorgeous, ghostly palace. On countless corridors, white lanterns hung eerily. Pavilions, terraces, and pavilions. Lotuses bloomed. Amidst the ghostly aura, only the sound of panicked footsteps could be heard in the dark silence. Wei Wei Bai lifted her skirt, her silver hair fell to her calves, her clear, light-colored eyes were filled with fear. When Jinqian, that pervert. People can't be too shut-in. Look, after 700 years of shut-in, a good young man finally turned into an old monster with a strange temperament. She heard something groaning under the lotuses. Wei Wei Bai shivered, goosebumps rising. She was really scared. Because this place was directly pried up by Wen Jinqian from the abyss. Demons were all used by Wen Jinqian as nutrients for the lotuses. But those dark auras would become especially scary ghosts. They floated everywhere, waiting to eat people. She was now in the foundation establishment stage, still on the verge of falling. She could fall out of the foundation establishment stage at any time and become a pitiful little fox in the qi cultivation stage. She was not afraid of anything else, but ghosts. She did not know how Wen Jinqian knew that she was afraid of these things. This scary, strange, long, endless, and full of rooms. Black shadows were surging everywhere. It scared her to death. Wei Wei Bai was tired from running, but she could not return to her fox form. She did not know what seal Wen Jinqian made, she could only be in human form. The 95 blackened Wen Jinqian looked, a bit perverted. The system asked, "What happened?" Wei Wei Bai almost ran into the wall. "System, you're back." The system said, "I was just blocked." He was confused about why he was suddenly blocked. Could it be that Wen Jinqian did something to the host that was not suitable for children? Wei Wei Bai briefly explained Wen Jinqian's state, then said, "Looks like I'm not enough of a scumbag, this blackening value won't increase no matter what." The system said, "The host's skin is thick enough to say that she's not enough of a scumbag." The system was back, at least she was not alone, so she was not afraid. But he still had to pretend. After all, Wen Jinqian was going to break her hand. It sounded pretty scary. Suddenly, a terrifying giggle came from the depths of the corridor. A few pale hands appeared at the end of the corridor, as if something was crawling on the ground. Wei Wei Bai was terrified and immediately pushed open the door of the nearest room. With a creak, a huge room appeared. The beautiful wooden floor was brightly lit. "Why is this room so bright?" Wei Wei Bai frowned, but she still closed the door and locked it. Countless white curtains fluttered in the air. The room was like a lady's boudoir. There was a dressing table, a carved bed, and a wooden wardrobe. Lotus flowers of normal color were in full bloom in the vase. Wei Wei Bai felt that this room was very strange. But he could already hear the door creaking. Wen Jinqian insisted on playing hide-and-seek with her, so she could only bitterly hide in the closet. She had no choice. She was afraid of those sinister things. Luckily, he had the system, smashed together. Wei Wei Bai tried calling out. "System, blocked." Wei Wei Bai reached out to support her chin and thought calmly. Then, she roughly understood why the system kept disconnecting. This plane was a high-level plane. In terms of the system, the upper limit of power here was very similar to the system world. And when Jinqian had withstood so many lightning bolts, he had set up all kinds of barriers and arrays to restrain outsiders. The system might have been restrained. That was why its contact with her was so intermittent. Chapter 2446. Wei Wei Bai helplessly reached out and touched her face. She could only rely on herself. If she didn't torture Wen Jinqian to the point of blackening, she would be sorry for her desperation. Without blackening, she wouldn't even be afraid of ghosts. Wei Wei Bai took a deep breath and adjusted her state of mind. Her calm eyes changed again. Panic and fear appeared in her pure eyes. She trembled and hugged herself, burying her head in her knees. She seemed to be extremely scared. She couldn't even control her ears. They actually popped out, sharp and furry and unusually cute. Also unusually pitiful. She seemed to have heard something. Her ears perked up, and her beautiful eyes looked up, her eyelashes trembling violently. The sound of footsteps came from outside, slowly approaching the wardrobe. He seemed to know where she was. He knew exactly where she had escaped to. The footsteps stopped, as if he hadn't discovered the problem with the wardrobe. After a long pause, he slowly turned and left. The sound of the little fox breathing a sigh of relief came from the wardrobe. After a while, it was confirmed that there was no problem. The wardrobe slowly opened. Wei Wei Bai put her fingers on the wardrobe door, and her weak feet were just about to touch the ground. But she saw Wen Jinqian standing by the wardrobe, looking at her with a gentle smile. His eyes were filled with affection, and his voice was low, gentle, and hoarse. Wei Wei, is it fun? Wei Wei Bai's face turned pale. She desperately shrank back, and her beastly nature made her vigilant. No matter how gentle Wen Jinqian was, she looked at him as if she was looking at a terrifying enemy. Wen Jinqian didn't care at all. He pressed forward step by step, forcing Wei Wei Bai into the dark wardrobe. Then he looked at the little fox's beautiful face with satisfaction, which had lost all color. But there was a hint of fragile beauty. She was beautiful no matter what. It was as if she was born to seduce him. When Jinqian gently reached out and gently landed on her wrist. Her wrist bones were extremely slender and fragile. She only had the power of the foundation establishment stage. He knew that, but he couldn't find where the 70% of his power was. Actually, it didn't matter. Maybe it was lost by the little fox. After all, her ability had always been terrible. It was possible that she couldn't even grasp the power that was sent to her. When Jinqian smiled. I'm not afraid. Why would I hurt you? It was as if he was lying when he said that he wanted to break her hand. The little fox's ears trembled. Her silver hair was scattered all over her body, and her round eyes were filled with pitiful tears. Her voice softened. Master, you're the best. I still like you. Her voice was tender and soft, so sweet that it seeped into one's bones. The coquettishness of a little girl was soft and cute like an apricot flower on a branch. When Jinqian gazed at her and couldn't help but smile. The redness in his eyes deepened. Me too. I like Wei Wei the most. As soon as Zhang Xian said those words, the meridians in his wrist ruptured. Wei Wei Bai's eyes widened as fear flashed through her eyes. The pain in her wrist was unavoidable. She struggled with all her might and cried out in pain. However, when Jinqian hugged her gently and grabbed her wrist tightly with one hand, almost lifting her up. He comforted her softly, but he didn't know when the white robe came off. It had turned completely black. The sound of comforting words was accompanied by her screams. In the abyss-like room, it was mournful and pitiful. When the meridians in his wrist ruptured completely, Wei Wei Bai staggered out of Wen Jinqian's arms and fell to the ground, trembling all over. Her forehead was covered in cold sweat and she wanted to escape. However, she used all her strength to move one step. When Jinqian had already stepped on her skirt. Slash. Chapter 2447. Wei Wei Bai's scared eyes showed resentment. She trembled and said, "Madman, you're a madman." When Jinqian looked at her light-colored eyes, which burst out with resentment and anger. The corners of her eyes were red, but she was very pitiful. He chuckled softly. The shadow of his body was like hell, covering the poor and weak girl. Before he completely pulled her into the terrible darkness. He was already close to her ear and said unbelievably gently, "It's all because of you. My obsession is all because of you. My obsession is also because of you." So he went mad with any violent hatred and love that appeared. She had to solve it. It was time to grow up and know what it meant to make people fall in love with her. If you like someone, you have to like them forever. Even if that like was fake. You have to pretend to like them forever. She wouldn't. He would teach her. Who asked him to be her master? In the boundless dark wonderland. In the depths of the ghostly palace. There was only one huge room that was brightly lit and as warm as spring. Black and gold lotuses bloomed in the bottle. There was no incense burner, but the room was full of a strong and strange fragrance. There was also another strange and ambiguous aura. The thick carpet was red as blood, comfortable but unsettling. Behind the beautiful and thick screen, the carved bed was full of the softest silk. On the dressing table, the eyebrow pencil was thrown casually and the rouge was crushed. The bronze mirror was also thrown to the ground. It was as if someone had been pressed here and struggled to break these things. The owner didn't tidy up and let them scatter. In the empty and quiet room, only the occasional panting sound of panic could be heard. In the messy bed, a person wrapped in a quilt was huddled in a small corner. Under the red quilt, Wei Wei Bai's face was dull. She was dull because she was tired. Who worked continuously for a month and stayed on standby for 24 hours a day without rest. You're tired too. Yes, during this month. She had scolded Wen Jinqian more than 10,000 times. Every word was heartbreaking. She even scolded his kidney function. Wen Jinqian's blackening value was stuck at 96. It was the same as favorability. He didn't move at all. She deeply doubted whether her business skills had regressed. Was it because he was already at the age of retirement, yet he still refused to admit his old age? Just like those female celebrities in their 40s or 50s who still insisted on acting as young girls and even went for plastic surgery. Even if she once had the glory of a movie queen. He would never return. Bai Weiwei reached out and touched her face. It was okay. His face didn't need a facelift. Perhaps his acting skills had deteriorated. Weiwei Bai sighed. Wen Jinqian is such an old scumbag. Even when I suffocate him with a blanket in my sleep, he still doesn't get blackened. Is he really a turtle? How could he be so tolerant? It was the same for the early stages of the game. Their favorability didn't increase at all. Crossover system, Adonis, come here. /crossover system, Adonis, come here. Read at https://www.sashu.com/crossover system, Adonis, come here. Crossover system, Adonis, come here. Read at https://m/sashu.com to facilitate your next reading. You can click on Crossover system, Adonis, come here. Chapter 2448. Why did it have to appear at the end to scare people? The system said faintly, what happened? Host, did you smash it? Weiwei Bai, oh my god, the system is finally back. He had been disconnected for a month, he missed him so much. The system flipped through the information again, why is your leg broken? Weiwei Bai, I tried to escape, then it broke. The system, you broke it when you fell. Weiwei Bai, I fell into Wen Jinqian's arms and he broke it. The system, how could the host say such terrifying things with such a calm expression? Weiwei Bai, but, my hand is better now, I can move it. It just can't take anything. After all, her meridians were broken, if Wen Jinqian didn't treat it. Not to mention moving, the bones and muscles in her hand would have shrunk. The system, your hand is broken too. Bai Weiwei, yes, oh. It was originally broken very badly, but when Wen Jinqian tied my wrist, I struggled a little better, so he treated it for me. The system, host, how can you say such horrible things with a smile on your face? The system tried to speak, then, what are you going to do? Weiwei Bai was expressionless, let me think, I've almost used up all my torture methods. Self-mutilation won't work, depression won't work, amnesia won't fool old Wen, cheating won't work, I don't have a partner. Who knew that old Wen would turn black? He didn't recognize anyone. Su-san only had a scandal with her. He looked like he was going to kill her. If it wasn't for the fact that she didn't show any care for Su-san, Su-san would probably be dead by now. After all, he was her senior who fed her before. It wouldn't kill her if she didn't have feelings for him. Wei Wei Bai thought about it and finally sighed, my tricks aren't working anymore. These days, it wasn't easy to come up with new tricks to torture someone. The system said, why don't we stop torturing him? Wei Wei Bai, I'm already at 96. If I don't complete the side mission, am I going to eat flies while wearing diapers? That made sense. After all, he didn't want to go around begging with a bowl. Therefore, it was better to torture him. But how could he do that? The old monster's skin was so thick. Why can't I heal him? This guide is too southern. The system suddenly said in alarm, the male lead is here. Actually, he wasn't too sure. He just felt that something was coming. With a whoosh, Wei Wei Bai's eyes lit up. Strength was coming. Her expression changed, and she rolled off the bed without thinking. The blanket on her body had spread out a little, and the skin under her neck had a delicate and clean beauty under the light. If one ignored those deep and obvious marks. Meanwhile, the system, he's fucking blocked. When Jinqian quietly appeared beside the bed, he saw Wei Wei Bai struggling to move forward with her weak hands. On the red carpet, her silver hair spread out, messy and gorgeous. He didn't say anything and just watched calmly. His gaze was gentle. Until he saw that she was tired and couldn't move anymore. Only then did Jinqian bend down and reach out to hug her. Unexpectedly, Wei Wei Bai seemed to know that he was coming. Instead, she raised her head and reached out to hug his neck, hiding in his arms. Her legs were weak. There was no strength. Wei Wei Bai didn't seem to care. She whispered pitifully to Jinqian, Master, I was wrong. I won't do it again. Chapter 2449. Jinqian revealed a gentle smile and reached out to touch her face. There were still traces of makeup on it. He wanted to draw her eyebrows and dress her up, but she was unwilling and made a fuss for a long time. His fingertips slid across the lotus petals between her eyebrows. The spiritual energy of the petals imprisoned her spirit meridians. She couldn't cultivate on her own and could only be maintained in the shaky foundation establishment stage. Her fingers gripped his clothes tightly. There were still traces on her fingertips. He calmly held her fingers and put her on the bed. Wei Wei Bai trembled as if she was afraid. Jinqian traced her face and gently touched her hair, tangling his fingers in it. Wei Wei, do you still want to escape? A trace of fear appeared in Wei Wei Bai's eyes. She hurriedly shook her head and revealed a stiff smile. Why would I escape? I like Master so much. The little fox was extremely pitiful. Her eyes were watery, and every time she was in pain, she would cry. She scolded him as she cried. The more she scolded him, the more pitiful she seemed. Jinqian's eyes were calm and deep, but under this calmness, there were extremely twisted and demonic emotions. His voice was as beautiful as a clear spring. Since you like it, then live well with Master. In the beginning, he just wanted to live well with her. She was unwilling. He just spent a little more effort to break her hands and feet and build a cage. When the little fox heard this, her voice trembled with anticipation. If I live well with Master, can I go out? Jinqian stared at her beautiful and charming face. During this period of time, she had really become more and more beautiful. She shouldn't be cultivating immortality like this. Perhaps the one who was more powerful than her. He wanted to capture her as a furnace and torture her to death. He just couldn't bear to part with her. Otherwise, she would have been a furnace long ago. This world was too willful and flamboyant. People who wantonly squandered their beauty. They couldn't live well. That was why he locked her up to protect her. When Jinqian's smile deepened. His fingers were gentle but didn't allow her to resist as he pushed her onto the bed. Sure. Wait until Wei Wei learns how to love before going out. Wei Wei Bai's voice immediately trembled as she revealed a fawning smile. Master, I love you. When Jinqian's eyes narrowed and his body stiffened. The gentle smile on his face froze. Wei Wei Bai's eyes lit up. She softened her voice and said sweetly, I love you, husband. These words were obviously fake, but it made Wen Jinqian's emotions surge. He looked at her for a long time and finally smiled warmly. I love you too. I love you so much that I wish I could kill you. The feelings that he cherished were just lies that she could casually use as a tool. How could someone be so hateful? Ding, the male lead's blackening value is 97. Ever since he discovered a new way to torture people. Wei Wei Bai confessed every day, no matter how badly she was abused. She anxiously used her weak hands to wrap around the strong man. Master, I love you so much. Master, your eyes are so beautiful. They're like gems. I love you more and more every day. Husband, you'll be my husband for life. Loving you is the meaning of my life. What a cheesy way of saying sweet things. Awkwardly sweet mode activated. At first, Wen Jinqian could still look at her as a joke. But gradually, the look in his eyes changed. After all, the little fox's gentleness and active adoration were too passionate. She was much more passionate than when she first pursued him. He clearly knew that it was fake. It was fake, the little fox called out sweetly again, husband, when Jinqian finally raised his irritable and dark eyes. He could no longer pretend to be gentle and said coldly, shut up. Wei Wei Bai smiled. You look the best in the world when you're angry. I love you even more. When Jinqian, for the 1000th time, he wanted to strangle her. How could someone make use of their feelings so thoroughly? No matter how much pain he made her feel, she could use all her strength to say that she loved him. Over and over again. Did she have to torture him in this way? Wei Wei Bai, yes, master. Her weak hand grabbed his hair. Her beautiful face was so innocent that it was cruel. Husband, I love you so much. Are you happy? When Jinqian, Wei Wei Bai, I love you so much. When can we go out? When Jinqian, ding, the male lead's blackening value is 99. Chapter 2450. The system, who was chewing on a small biscuit, felt that this blackening value was purely caused by Wei Wei Bai's disgust. So be it if you want to torture people. You don't deserve a beating. Anyway, with the painkiller, the host acted recklessly. That pretentious strength was not something a normal person could bear. No, the system looked at Wen Jinqian's handsome face with a look of despair. Even if it was the abnormal Wen Jinqian. He was also tortured enough. The host stepped on Wen Jinqian's most painful place and stomped her feet desperately. She also added chili and cumin and roasted it. Wei Wei Bai lay in the lotus. In the pool of demonic energy and immortal energy, the lotus buds bloomed. She narrowed her eyes expressionlessly. Her eyelashes were wet, but her eyes were extremely cold. Her hands and feet were weak. Originally, there was one hand that was normal. But I said I love you too many times. In the end, when Jinqian grimaced and broke the meridians of her good hand. And she was so angry that she bit his neck. His skin was obviously very tough, but when she bit it, it was hard to resist. He deliberately softened his body and let her teeth sink into his skin as she wished. In the end, Wei Wei Bai's lips were bloody. She laughed even more desperately and crazily than him. The resentment in her eyes was cold to the bone. But it made the beautiful girl look even more like a blood-soaked demon, seductive. Her delicate lips curled up slightly, revealing a beautiful smile. "Master, I really love you so much." The hatred in her words, with desperate malice, was wrapped in words of love. He couldn't kill her. He couldn't win against her. As she said, "What did you love me have to do with me?" How much he loved her. She dared to use so much malice and viciousness to torture him with this love. The two of them had been torturing each other for more than half a year. And the last bit of blackening value. It was still stuck. However, the old monster's temperament was very patient. Maybe the blackening value had already gone up. But because she endured it, it didn't go up. Maybe one day the blackening value would automatically be full. Wei Wei Bai lies in the pool, allowing the lotus flowers to approach her. She exuded a gentle and humble aura. Lotus both loved and feared her. When Jin Qian was dressed in a messy and lazy black robe, he lay by the side of the pool and looked at the girl's pale and alluring face. His half-closed eyes hid the darkness. Wei Wei Bai's expression was incomparably indifferent, as if she had lost her spirit. Even her ears were stuck in her silver hair. If it wasn't for him tormenting her too much. She was too lazy to say that she loved him. Every time he hurt her, she would hold on to his pain and not let go even if she died. She had learned how to perish together with the enemy quite quickly. When Jin Qian reached out and gently stroked her hair, the little fox's ears twitched, but she couldn't be bothered with him. She was tired. She didn't even have the strength to torture him. If it wasn't for him, she wouldn't have been able to climb out of the pool. When Jin Qian asked gently, "Do you want to go out?" Wei Wei Bai's eyelashes fluttered for a moment before she laughed in an indescribably sarcastic manner. Her voice was hoarse. "Go out for what? I'll just watch Master. No matter how beautiful this world is, it can't compare to a single strand of my master's hair." Because she was tired, she didn't have the energy to be resentful and sarcastic. She actually seemed a little sincere. Sincere. When Jin Qian smiled, mocking himself for having such a childish imagination, she was only starting to hate him half-heartedly. Whether it was hate or love, they both required energy. During this period of time, he might have squeezed all the energy out of her resentment. Chapter 2451. When Jin Qian looked at her quietly, his deep red eyes sparkling, his pale fingertips touched a lotus flower beside him unhurriedly. The young man looked down tiredly, and the lotus flower rubbed against his fingertips as if comforting him. However, he slowly pinched his fingertips and crushed the petals, letting them fall into the pool. The girl in the pool trembled again, and her pale face turned a little red. She immediately looked up and stared at him. The young man's thin lips curled into a cold smile, but there was no trace of a smile in his clear red eyes. When the lotus flower fell, it was the erosion of power. Of course, she would feel pain soaking in the pool. Unfortunately, she didn't care about physical pain anymore. After all, he couldn't bear to let her suffer so much pain that she broke down. It was just a little coercion. In the end, he didn't go too far. Even when he broke her arms and legs, he immediately sealed her spiritual aura to treat her pain. After all, she was in so much pain. He also felt terrible. When Jin Qian got up unhurriedly and reached into the pool, his wide sleeves were soaked. However, he didn't care at all. Instead, he held the delicate Wei Wei Bai in his arms. He carefully held her as if he was holding a peerless treasure. He was still gentle. After soaking in the lotus pool, you can at least move your arms and legs. You can also walk. As long as you don't run, you'll be fine. Wei Wei Bai raised her eyebrows and said sharply, "Aren't you afraid that I'll run away? It's better for my arms and legs to be broken. Otherwise, how can I make my husband's fragile and suspicious heart feel at ease? I love you so much, of course I have to think about you." When Jin Qian stopped in his tracks and looked down at her. Under his beautiful eyelashes, his red eyes were strangely gentle. He pursed his lips and revealed a calm smile. "Since you said so, then it's just a little more effort for me to break your arms again." She was willful and irritable. He was deranged. What a perfect match for a scholar and a beauty. Wei Wei Bai immediately cowered. She weakly rubbed against his skin and acted coquettishly like a cat. "Master, you should save some energy for other things." The meaning of these words stunned Wen Jinqian, and his ears turned red. Then, he calmly suppressed the heat in his eyes. Her body couldn't take it anymore. Wei Wei Bai wore a lotus dress and held a rabbit lantern in her hand. A rare happy smile appeared on her face. Her silver curls were tied up in 2 lovely braids with red ribbons, and a few strands of silver curls fell to the sides of her face. There was a hint of laziness and casualness. Wen Jinqian was also in white, but his red eyes were red. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back. It was the Lantern Festival. The world was bustling. There were people and beautiful lights everywhere. The little fox seemed very curious. She held the rabbit lantern and asked with a smile, "Shizhuan, what are they doing?" When Jin Qian stared at her for a while before saying in a hoarse voice, "When you're making a wish, put the note into the lamp and into the river, and your wish will come true." Wei Wei Bai said with a smile, "People are really good at deceiving themselves. If you throw a lamp into the water, it will only sink. How can it fulfill your wish?" When Jin Qian was silent for a moment. Then, he smiled as if he was mocking himself. Yeah, people are really used to lying to themselves. Even if it was a wish that couldn't be fulfilled. He also did everything he could to obtain it. Wasn't he just lying to him? The little fox suddenly went to the fortune-teller's stall and found a pen and paper. Then, he wrote a wish and stuffed it into the rabbit lantern. Then, he threw it into the water. Crossover system, Adonis, come here. /crossover system, Adonis, come here. / crossover system, Adonis, come here. Download crossover system, Adonis, come here. Mobile crossover system, Adonis, come here, comma. Chapter 2452. The lantern followed the thousands of lights and floated forward. When Jinqian's eyelashes fluttered. "No, you don't want to deceive yourself." Wei Wei Bai smiled brightly and was extremely carefree. "Yes, I'm just playing." With that, she turned around to leave. When Jinqian stood there in a daze. Then, he gently raised his hand and the rabbit lantern returned from the water. It reappeared in his hand. Wei Wei Bai turned around and raised her eyebrows. "Why did Master bring it back?" When Jinqian said unhurriedly, "I wanted to see what your wish was. I can fulfill it for you." Wei Wei Bai's smile froze a little. Then, she snorted. What else could it be? Of course, it's to love Master forever. The gentle smile on Wen Jinqian's face disappeared. He held the lantern and felt like an ugly monster who was entertaining her. At this time, she still didn't forget to torture him. The wish hidden in the lantern was to leave him. When Jinqian took out the note but held it in his hand. In the end, he didn't open it and casually stuffed it into his sleeve pocket. After all, He already knew that this wish couldn't be fulfilled. Opening it would only make it more embarrassing. The little fox's legs were inconvenient. After walking for a long time, she began to slow down. She faintly endured the pain in her ankle. The lotus petals between her eyebrows became more delicate and her forehead was full of sweat. He originally wanted to endure until she begged for mercy. When Jinqian pressed on her thin shoulders. When the youth lowered his head and stared at her, his red eyes were gentle and calm. He had always been rational and restrained. Even if he was possessed, he was still so tolerant. "Come, I'll carry you." Bai Weiwei frowned and sneered, "Fake kindness, hypocrite." These words could no longer hurt him as long as they didn't say that they loved him. To him, any words were like heavenly sounds. After all, the little fox's voice was indeed soft, sweet and seductive. Although she disliked it, Weiwei Bai still lay on Wen Jinqian's back and lazily rested her chin on his hard shoulder. Her warm breath blew into his ear. "Master, how long can you live?" Wen Jinqian's footsteps seemed slow, but he was as fast as a shadow in the crowd. The flood of people in the world seemed to be the background of this elegant young man. His tone was indifferent and slightly hoarse. "Let's look at the heavenly Tao." The ninth bolt of tribulation lightning did not descend. It wasn't just his obsession. The power of the heavenly Tao was brewing, and he had committed a great taboo. When he entered the demonic state to block the lightning and fell into the abyss, for some reason, the power of the lightning tribulation was weakened. In the eyes of the heavenly Tao, he had obtained the immortal meridian through trickery. This was a great taboo for lightning tribulations. The last bolt of lightning was probably going to destroy his soul. That was why the heavenly Tao had been accumulating power all this time. When Jinqian swallowed the words that were about to come out of his mouth. If she knew, she would only be happy. After all, if she really failed at the last lightning tribulation, he wouldn't be able to lock her up anymore. She must be happy. The possessed Wen Jinqian tilted his head and thought for a moment. There was a hint of adorable hesitation on his face. "Why don't I hold her and block the lightning tribulation together? Just like the previous few times. In that case, if he died, she would have to be with him. Her soul would be destroyed and she would never be reincarnated." This thought appeared a few times. When she hurt him the most, she always thought this way. But when she hugged him and curled up into a ball, looking exceptionally pitiful and cute, he also felt reluctant. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 97. A question mark appeared above Weiwei Bai's head. // Chapter 2453. It was fine if Wen Jinqian's favorability didn't drop after being tortured to this extent. But his favorability actually increased. Was Wen Jinqian so tortured that he turned stupid? Forget it, it wasn't like there weren't masochists. She had seen too many of them, so she wasn't surprised. Weiwei Bai lay on Wen Jinqian's back and was carried by him to see many beautiful scenes of the Lantern Festival. It was rare for her to come out, so she didn't mess around. Instead, she quietly hugged Wen Jinqian's neck, her breath rubbing against his cheek, as if they hadn't fallen out before. Obedient and gentle. Wen Jinqian's thick black eyelashes drooped slightly, covering the flickering emotions in his red eyes. He liked it when she was so obedient. So it was rare that he didn't immediately return to Zhoutian. Suddenly, the young man heard the little fox's muttering voice. "Master, you're actually going to die, right?" When Jinqian's footsteps faltered for a moment, he glanced sideways at her. Her beautiful side profile gave off a calm and exquisite feeling under the light. The little fox still didn't know what was good for her. Even a person who has turned into a demon can't survive the last tribulation. "I've flipped through the book. You're definitely going to die. Was this another way to anger him? When Jin Qian looked ahead indifferently and said calmly, "Yes, I'm going to die." Is Wei Wei happy? Wei Wei Bai was silent for a moment. This silence seemed so solemn. He seemed to have sensed something and his heart trembled. But before he could think about it carefully, he still heard the little fox teasing him. "I love Master so much. If you really die, I can't die for love." When Jin Qian wasn't angry anymore, he sighed and said gently, "You always know how to make me angry. You don't have to die for love. Before I die, I'll torture you to death in bed." The little fox behind him stiffened. Although it was only for a moment. But it still made Wen Jinqian smile. It seemed that she was still afraid. She wasn't so lawless and heartless. When Jinqian lost interest in strolling around, his red eyes showed a twisted passion, and the demon that couldn't be suppressed appeared again. "Let's go back." His voice was hoarse and magnetic, making people's scalps go numb. Wei Wei Bai seemed to know what he was thinking. She sneered, "Beast." Under his beautiful eyelashes, Wen Jinqian's red eyes seemed to be stained with blood. "Yeah, he's only a beast to Wei Wei." Wei Wei Bai laid lazily on his shoulder and narrowed her foxy eyes. "That depends on whether you're still alive." As soon as she finished speaking, she suddenly disappeared. The sound of world-ending thunder gathered in the sky, shaking the heavens and earth. In the dark sky, the ferocious dark clouds were stirring. The thunder tribulation transformed into a huge thunder dragon wagging its tail. The final tribulation of the immortal formation realm. Helping people become immortals. Demonic soul powder. Demon crossing and bone changing. When Jin Qian was now a demon, his soul was destined to scatter. However, the white-robed youth did not look at the sky. He stood in the storm and looked up at Wei Wei Bai, who was standing not far away. The little fox's ears popped out. She sat cross-legged and looked at him with a smile. "Master, you gave me power, and I've used it to attract lightning for you. Are you happy?" 70% of Wen Jinqian's power. She released all of it, and the crazy power rushed into Wen Jinqian's body. He regained the strength of a peak youth. However, this also exposed his position and attracted the last thunder tribulation. When Jinqian stood quietly in the countless small lightning bolts. The lotus between his eyebrows was abnormally red. The thunder tribulation rolled in the sky. Countless lightning tentacles fell to the ground, cutting his skin. When Jinqian did not seem to see it. He still stood in the same place, his white robe billowing. Time seemed to have stopped in his eyes. Under his long and beautiful eyelashes, his pair of dark red eyes were filled with deep affection. He stared at Wei Wei Bai just like that. "Do you want me to die that much?" When Jinqian's tone was terrifyingly calm. Among the countless lightning tentacles, he heard the little fox's innocent and casual voice. "Why would I want you to die? I love you, husband." When Jinqian was silent for a while, the lightning tentacles rubbed against his cheeks, and the blood flowed like tears. So it was just forcing it from the beginning. His delicate and sad face finally twisted in despair. Everything was because of his insistence. Ding, the male lead's blackening value is 100. Download the https://www.sashu.com/download the full article, https://www.sashu.com download the full article, https://www.sashu.com download the full article, https://sashu.com Chapter 2454. She heard that the blackening value was 100. Wei Wei Bai was so touched that she wanted to go back immediately. If it weren't for the 3 points of favorability left, she would have killed herself immediately. Because if she was caught by Wen Jinqian, who had a blackening value of 100, the scene would be too beautiful. She didn't dare to imagine. Wei Wei Bai felt that she wouldn't just break her arms and legs next. Wen Jinqian would probably take out 100 textbooks of the top 10 torture methods and experiment on her one by one. She was about to get up when a few thunder tentacles fell beside her. There was an explosion. Some broken stones smashed towards her body. Although she was now at the foundation establishment stage, her body was actually worse than a normal mortal's. Because when Jinqian had emptied it, Wei Wei Bai was about to roll away when a pair of hands happened to catch her. The fingers were white and slender, so strong that they wanted to crush her bones. Wei Wei Bai's body stiffened. She looked up and saw that she was already in Wen Jinqian's arms. The young man's face was calm and cold, but the blood on the wound on his cheek was horrifying. His pair of dark red eyes were not clear, only the coldness of an endless abyss. When Jinqian lowered his head and pressed his cold forehead against the little fox's forehead. In the violent vortex of power, the young man was like a beautiful and gentle lover. His ink-black hair was spread out, his eyelashes were lowered, and his eyes were endless. The deep blood color had lost all the warmth that belonged to humans. In his eyes, there was still only her shadow. The girl's face was pale, but there was no trace of ridicule in her eyes. Instead, there was a trace of confusion and softness. Even because of the danger around them, she stayed in his arms obediently, not daring to go anywhere. When Jinqian maintained this beautiful position of hugging her with his forehead pressed against hers for a while. Then, he finally sighed. Do you know, if it weren't for the fact that the Tao technique I cultivate is heartless and heartless, I would have completely lost my mind and torn you apart. His demonic thoughts had entered his bones. If it were anyone else, they would have completely lost their mind and gone crazy. He was also on the verge of a mental breakdown. But because she was by his side, at least he had a trace of obsession to protect her and held on. And this trace of rationality was an ability that he had gained from cultivating the emotionless Tao art for 700 years. The last time he was bedeviled, his Tao wasn't deep enough. He had trapped the entire town and used it as a sacrificial offering after he had turned into a demon. But this time, the sacrifice was her. The corners of Wen Jinqian's mouth twitched helplessly, but he couldn't smile. Before the madness swallowed his reason, he said, I'll let you go. He still loved her. His reluctance to part with her seemed to come from the depths of his soul. Wen Jinqian had never thought that he would lose to a fox like this. Love was difficult. The heavens wanted him to undergo the tribulation, but the lightning tribulation was actually an extra one. She was the tribulation that was the saddest for him. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 98. As soon as the notification sounded, she saw the lifeless look in Wen Jinqian's eyes. A golden light appeared on his finger. It was a teleportation array. Wen Jinqian's lips were close to her ear. His breath was cold, but his words were hot. I'll give you all the things I left behind. With these, you'll be able to establish yourself in the immortal cultivation world. Don't lie to others like this in the future. I'm the one who treats you well. He wanted to say, will you miss me in the future? But that was too humble. This wasn't something Wen Jinqian should say. In the end, the youth just pursed his lips helplessly. The red in his eyes was stained with a few traces of moisture. Then he reached out and pressed her shoulder. Just as he was about to push her into the array. Next time you open the bookshelf, you'll see it. If you like. Chapter 2455. Wei Wei Bai seemed to have finally come to her senses. She hurriedly hugged him. Her movements were too hasty, and the red ribbons flew apart. Her silver curly hair also scattered all over Wen Jinqian's body. Her fingers gripped his collar tightly, and her nails even scratched the skin on his neck with too much force. Wen Jinqian looked at her quietly, helpless and mocking. Did she think that it was too easy for him to die like this? How else did she want to torture him? In the end, he heard the little fox in his arms say in a trembling voice, "Master, I was wrong. I won't lie to you in the future. Please forgive me." When Jinqian's ink-black hair fluttered. His white robe was torn apart, and cracks began to appear on his skin. It was the power of a huge lightning strike that began to descend. But not a single trace of power fell on the little fox. He was silent for a moment before smiling. "Don't be afraid. I won't kill you." Really? Was she afraid that he would kill her? His little fox was really greedy for life and afraid of death. Then, he let go without hesitation. Wei Wei Bai was thrown into the teleportation array by him. His eyes were as red as blood, his ink-black hair was messy, and his thin lips curved slightly. "No, you'd better keep lying to me. At least I can hear you say that you love me." Wei Wei Bai stretched out her fingers. Something was wrapped around her fingertips, and she suddenly held his wrist. There was a clear scar on the young man's fair wrist. It was the mark left behind when he pulled out the threads of love. When Wei Wei Bai fell into the air and was about to land in front of the golden teleportation array, that slender red thread wrapped around his hand again. It was the same place as last time. It directly seeped into his wound. It reached his bones and entered his soul. He loved her, so he had no resistance to the threads of love. Wei Wei Bai used the threads of love to tie him up again. When they first opened their eyes, their entanglement of love was an unexpected small mistake. But now, it was the result of her painstaking efforts and painstaking efforts. The threads of love were intertwined. Their souls and auras were intertwined. Then, the lightning would misunderstand that she and he were the same person. When Jinqian's pupils constricted, he wanted to break the relationship. But it was too late. Time seemed to slow down. All the images shattered into thousands of light spots. The little fox disappeared into the transfer array and the lightning that was about to fall hesitated. She seemed to wonder why Wen Jinqian had become two people. When Wen Jinqian sensed that something was wrong, the lightning tribulation disappeared. The dark clouds dispersed, and the thick thunder dragon ran off to God knows where. He was at a loss for a moment. After all, this was something that had never happened in the cultivation world before. After the lightning tribulation appeared, it disappeared halfway. And he didn't feel like he had passed the lightning tribulation. The traces left behind by the lightning tribulation seemed to have seen something and chased after it. He was the one who had to transcend the tribulation, when Jinqian's messy black hair fell across his chest. His white robe was tattered and disheveled under the dark sky. The elegant young man seemed unusually lonely. He suddenly realized something and slowly blinked his slightly confused eyes. Then, he lowered his head and looked at the love thread on his wrist. Chapter 2456. The spiritual light was like a sharp blade that suddenly pierced into his brain. When Jinqian's calm and blank expression suddenly changed. The lightning tribulation did not disappear. But the person chasing had changed. Love entered her soul, and her soul was stained with his aura. The more he loved her, the more his aura was on her soul. So much so that even the lightning tribulation recognized the wrong person. A huge teleportation array appeared under their feet, and when Jinqian had disappeared, Wei Wei Bai was trembling. Fuck, this lightning is too strong. The lightning dragon followed her. when Jinqian's teleportation array teleported her thousands of miles away. He was afraid that the lightning tribulation would affect her. This also caused the lightning tribulation's reaction to be a little slow, and it took some time to catch up. Of course, the lightning dragon was not an idiot. It had its own navigation system, and it was a professional with a recognition system. Even if she tied up Wen Jinqian with love, it was tainted with his soul aura. She still couldn't fool the lightning tribulation. But the supermarket products could. She endured the pain and spent 20 life points to buy something that could change soul aura for 10 minutes. Now, when Jinqian's soul was filled with her soul aura, and her soul aura was Wen Jinqian's, the lightning tribulation recognized people based on soul aura. After all, no matter how awesome the cultivation world was, no one had invented something that could change soul aura. So the lightning tribulation was tricked and chased after Wei Wei Bai. This plane cost a little too much. She could only go back and bite Yi Yuxuan. If it weren't for Yi Yuxuan, she estimated that when she conquered the plane, she wouldn't have died from failure, but from poverty. Fortunately, she had a golden thigh, so she could scrape some life points from her life points to squander. The system glanced at the aggressive lightning dragon. It also sighed. It's really thick. If it was a human, his abs would probably be 180. Wei Wei Bai, is that still a human? Not a centipede. She said, is Wen Jinqian here? There were only 2 points of favorability left. She was waiting to solve the misunderstanding and help him block the lightning tribulation. Then, he could go straight home and soar. The system looked around. It's here, it's here. You can start preparing for the drama class. Wei Wei Bai quickly rubbed her face. It wasn't easy to become a drama queen. She felt that her face had developed muscles. Otherwise, how could she cope with so many expressions? If eyes could win a prize. When her eyes were acting, she could probably win an Academy Award every year. Wei Wei Bai took a deep breath, straightened her back, and finally said, okay, undo it. Her aura was hidden. However, Wen Jinqian's soul aura was hers. Therefore, Lei Long couldn't find anyone to attack. She unraveled the aura of Wen Jinqian's soul. Lei Long immediately discovered that a huge black cloud vortex had condensed above Wei Wei Bai's head. The surrounding wind turned into sharp knives. They attacked her with all their might. She felt as if she was standing in the eye of a terrible typhoon, on the verge of collapse. When Wen Jinqian rushed over, he saw a petite and fragile girl, raising her neck as if she was offering a sacrifice. Her delicate and slender neck had already been injured by the wind. Fine beads of blood scattered and were blown away by the wind. It hurt so much that she trembled. A huge thunder dragon poked its head out from the sky. The 9th immortal tribulation struck with an incomparably terrifying pressure, looking down on the weak human world. Lightning intertwined, turning the dark sky into a terrifying day. Wei Wei Bai, who was in the middle, had no ability to block this lightning tribulation at all. To read the full article at https://www.sashu.com//. To read on your phone, https://m/sashu.com. Chapter 2457. With her body's condition, the lightning tribulation didn't land. Her body was destroyed, and her soul was shattered and disappeared. The little fox at the Foundation establishment stage was far from the lightning dragon in terms of strength. Wen Jinqian wanted to get close to her at all costs. But they were too far away. His teleportation array was blocked by the power of the lightning tribulation. He was isolated from the center of the lightning tribulation. Once the lightning tribulation began, no one was in the middle of it. They would be automatically isolated. He was just at the edge of the lightning tribulation's power, and the huge lightning seal made it difficult for him to move. When Jin Qian drilled into the periphery of the seal, his body bathed in blood, his eyes confused and sad. He didn't understand. He didn't understand why the person standing in the middle of the lightning tribulation was the little fox. Didn't she hate him? When the threads of love entered his soul, he found that the aura of his soul had changed. He didn't know how she did it. She could actually exchange the aura of the two people. But later on, he realized that she was going to block the lightning tribulation for him. Why did she block it for him? There was a vague answer that was rolling in his heart. But he didn't dare to believe it. Step by step, he resisted the power of the lightning dragon outside the immortal tribulation. Just like that, his slender body walked towards the center. Every step was consuming his life. His footprints were bloody. But the lightning dragon had been waiting for too long, and it rushed down recklessly. Amidst the loud sound of thunder, he saw the little fox suddenly turn around, her silver curly hair flying in a beautiful arc. Her round eyes were filled with a determined light. As if she didn't expect to see him, a moving smile finally appeared on her calm face. As if seeing him for the last time was the happiest thing for her. This smile was so bright and pure that it made people's hearts tremble. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 99. When Jin Qian quickened his steps and pounced towards her with all his strength. But Wei Wei Bai took a few steps back, stretched out her hands, and raised her head to meet the knot that should have belonged to him. When Jin Qian finally roared, "Wei Wei Bai, why?" Wei Wei Bai's eyelashes fluttered. Her light-colored eyes had a beautiful luster as she tilted her head to look at him. Then, she revealed a cute smile. What else could it be? Of course it's because I love you, Master. The thunder tribulation fell in the white light. The spiritual energy of the earth boiled up, and the air exploded with an unimaginable light and sound. It was the sound of boundless spiritual energy colliding with the enormous lightning tribulation. When Jin Qian no longer looked like a human. His face was covered in blood and he finally reached out to grab her arm. He wanted to protect her. The wood-type spiritual qi seized the vitality of the earth. Even if the life force of this place was exhausted, he also had to protect her. A smile of relief appeared on his face as he grasped her wrist. There was still time. He hugged her. Even if the target of the lightning tribulation was her, he still had the strength to block all the damage and keep her safe. But by the time he realized that something was wrong, it was too late. The little fox's wrist began to dissipate. Her body was too fragile. The collision between the thunder tribulation and the spiritual energy crushed her fragile body. Wei Wei Bai looked at him gently. Her body began to disperse. When Jin Qian stared at her blankly, the scene seemed to freeze. Everything about her turned into specks of light in his eyes. And in his incomplete sleeve was the piece of paper that she had made a wish. It was swept out by the wind. The ink-colored words were graceful and beautiful. Written on it were the most beautiful words in the world. I wish that my master will no longer love me and will happily become an immortal. In the future, he will think of me occasionally. Who asked me to be cute? I'm cute. The cute tone could almost be imagined as the little fox's crafty and smiling appearance. Master, I'm so cute. It's true, unfortunately, you don't believe me. When Jin Qian heard that his heart was satisfied for a moment. She loved him. But his heart was broken again. He lost her. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 100. // to facilitate your next reading, you can click on Chapter 2458. Blackening value, 100. Favorability, 100. Both the side and main missions were completed. Ha 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 ha. Ha 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 my ass. The time of the strategy was pending. It was actually pending. So Wei Bai and the system squatted in the dark. They stared at the shining time of the strategy on the screen. Finally, Wei Bai rubbed her face and felt that life was so hopeless. What do we do? How long will it be pending? The system also rubbed its face and sighed. Maybe it will be unpending soon. The undetermined time of attack was from the previous plane. So Wei Bai and the system were not familiar with it. Plus, the strategy time was not very important to them. Wei Bai was so excited about the strategy that she did not even think about the pending time. She would never be so careless in the past. It was because she was cute in the beginning that her brain went blank. In the end, she finally stopped being cute and became a flirtatious bitch. Although her brain did not go blank, she forgot a lot of details. Also, that old pervert Wen Jinqian really tormented her too much, causing her to be weak and her brain not working well. She was so happy that both the side and main missions were completed and she could go back happily. In the end, she was locked in a little black room with the system. Without a body, only her soul was left, staring at a bright screen. The bright time on the screen was pending. If the time was pending, she would have to stay here forever. What to do? Don't ask. If you ask again, you will die. Bai Weiwei's face was haggard. Don't tell me, I'm going to stay here forever, all alone and dark. The system said, don't you still have me? Wei Bai said, if I want to accompany you forever. I'd rather be alone. The system, do you still want feelings? What are you talking about? Suddenly, a light spot appeared in the darkness, and a gentle breeze blew. There was wind and light, it was the exit. Wei Bai immediately jumped up. Hey, there's an exit, we can go back. God knows how long they have been chatting here. One would get tired of just chatting and watching the Calabash brothers. She had spent so much of her life points in this immortal cultivation plane. She wouldn't go and get some life points from Yi Yuxuan. She felt uneasy. How much she missed her real life. Life points. The system felt that something was amiss. It looked at the time, and it was still waiting. He immediately said, the time is still to be determined. Pending meant that he couldn't return to reality. Even if there was an exit, it didn't mean that he could return to reality. However, Wei Bai ran away happily in the form of a white fog. Who cares? It's good to go out and take a look. Aren't you tired of staying here? If she didn't bask in the sun, she would be lacking calcium. Then, Wei Bai stepped out of the light and, he couldn't see anything clearly. It was still dark. I'll peel off your entire family. Furthermore, it wasn't just darkness. She also felt a bone-breaking pain. Kacha, kacha, kacha. Bones were broken and then reconnected. Wei Bai, the rich, exotic fragrance gave her goosebumps. The fragrance of the lotus was especially strong. However, this fragrance that was 10 times more concentrated smelled more like a biological weapon. Wei Bai finally asked, what's going on? The system, you've become a lotus root. Wei Bai, the system was afraid that the host's knowledge was lacking, so it explained, you know Naja, right? After he committed suicide, didn't he change into a lotus root avatar and continue his killing spree? Your husband also changed into a lotus root avatar for you. He's currently summoning your soul. / / To facilitate your next reading, you can click on the button. Chapter 2459. Wei Bai, so I returned to Wen Jinqian's side. No, didn't he become an immortal? The ninth bolt of Xianlei could not kill Wen Jinqian. No matter how disgusting Wen Jinqian's method was, the Xianlei could only accept it. Who asked him to withstand the ninth bolt of Xianlei? Did she become an immortal with Wen Jinqian? The system pondered for a while, then tried to explain in more common words. He changed his fate. Wei Bai, how? The system. He removed most of his immortal meridians and connected them directly to the lotus root, planning to raise you. Wei Bai, why did it sound a little vicious? What was going on? The system. Because most of his immortal meridians were removed, he was not qualified to be soar. But it's okay, he was the first soar to withstand the 9 heavens Xianlei in 10,000 years, so even if he is now a disabled immortal, he is still a super powerful big boss on the road of immortal cultivation. The kind of big boss that everyone who met had to bow their heads and respectfully called Senior Qian Qian. After all, he killed a Mahayana cultivator. Now, in the cultivation world, only those 2 crooked melons and broken dates were left. Wen Jinqian was still walking sideways. No, there was still a Mahayana cultivator who had just advanced. It was Su San who had been tortured by Wen Jinqian for a long time and was kicked out of the Heavenly Gate sect. He had cultivated to the Mahayana stage. Sure enough, suffering was the best way for a person to grow. His cultivation level rose as fast as leaks. Wei Bai listened to the system's words and felt that Wen Jinqian seemed to have become stupid. He was quite stupid. Under the 9 heavens Xianlei, normal people would know that her soul had been scattered. She only dared to do that because the system could protect her soul. Wen Jinqian should also know. She could not grow. She even took out most of her immortal meridians to raise the lotus root. No matter what, she still could not move, as if she was restrained somewhere. Occasionally, only cracking sounds could be heard. Finally, one day, a low, hoarse, but strangely familiar voice sounded softly. There are too many roots. Let me help you trim them. Wei Bai, he felt like he had turned into a sweet potato. Wen Jinqian's voice penetrated the darkness, still warm and calm. Today's weather is good. You should bask in the sun more, Wei. Wei Bai, she's out in the sun because she lacks calcium. I don't think there's anything wrong with what he said. Later on, he began to talk more. It's raining. The sound of the rain falling on the lotus leaves, does it sound nice? Wei Bai nodded. Since she had nothing else to do, she could just chat with Wen Jinqian. The other party seemed to be stunned. After a long silence, he said, "You can move." Bai Wei was also stunned. That's right, she could move. Then she looked down and found that she had turned into a beautiful, pink, lotus flower. Bai Wei, what the hell? She was in a vegetative state. The system was also munching on its biscuits. The host turned into a lotus flower for a long time. She didn't notice, and he didn't dare to say. And Wei Bai suddenly found that she had regained her vision. She saw that she was planted in a huge lotus pond. The lotus pond was filled with celestial energy. There was white fog everywhere. There were no flowers, only a bunch of lotus leaves. She stood in the middle, shining brightly. What a beautiful big lotus flower. Sure enough, she was the prettiest when she turned into a flower. Ah, Wen Jinqian, I'll kill your whole family. You turned me into a lotus flower. Beside the lotus pond, golden specks of light filled the sky and scattered in all directions. The young man's black hair fell to his ankles, and his loose white robe was casually draped over his slender body. Chapter 2460. His dark eyes were as deep as the abyss, filled with endless loneliness and coldness. He sensed the emotional fluctuations in the lotus flower, and a hint of surprise appeared in his cold eyes. He stepped into the pool barefoot, and the water was like flat ground. His ankles fell into the water, but they didn't get wet at all. He came to the side of the lotus flower and squatted down. His black hair fell into the water, floating in the transparent water like black silk. When Jinqian reached out his fair fingertips and touched her petals gently. "Are you conscious now?" His voice was low like a murmur, filled with suppressed anticipation. Wei Bai trembled from his touch. It was purely ticklish. When Jinqian couldn't help but smile. His eyes were clear, as if he was still that young man who had just met Wei Bai and had never experienced pain. "It doesn't matter even if you forget the past." He slowly touched her petals. Under his lowered eyelashes, his eyes were deep and beautiful. "Anyway, I remember. Wei Bai, I remember everything. I remember everything. You don't need to remember." He still remembered how she tortured him. Wasn't this settling the score after the autumn? Time passed quickly after becoming a lotus flower. She often closed her eyes to sleep. When she woke up, the system told her that she had slept for months. Wei Bai, no, she felt that she had only slept for 5 minutes. Wei Bai didn't know how long had passed. She felt that it had been 10 days to half a month. But the system said that at least 10 years had passed. Wei Bai, this time was worthless, right? It had only been 10 days. How could she sleep for 10 years? She complained to the system. The system flipped through 1,000 movies, TV series, and cartoons, plus a warehouse of books and sihai. "I finished reading these. Do you want to review them with me? If you have the guts, don't sleep. Come and fight me." The system had already become an old system. If time continued to wait, he would become a fossilized system. And the host was still the same host. Because she had directly slept away the matter. So what if he was in a vegetative state? Just when the system and the host thought that time was going to be suspended forever. Suddenly, after being stuck for a long time, the time appeared. Time, 1 month. Wei Bai and the system laughed at the same time. What was he doing earlier? How many years had it been? Why did he have to pretend for a month? Forget it, I can go back when I have time. After waiting for another month, he would be able to return home. Therefore, Wei Bai decided to continue being a lotus flower for another month. When Jinqian, on the other hand, was still as calm as ever. However, from time to time, he would throw some heavenly treasures into the lotus pond. She spent almost every day by the side of the lotus, lowering her head and whispering some interesting things to him. It was as if he would continue like this forever. But one day, when Wei Bai woke up from her sleep, she found Wen Jinqian leaning against the stem of the lotus. She had grown especially sturdy, like a lotus flower on a tree. It was as if she had eaten hormones to grow up. Therefore, the slender and beautiful young man leaned against the stem of the lotus and stroked the huge lotus petal with his delicate fingers. He didn't feel awkward at all. Instead, he felt that the young man was prettier than the flowers. It was unbelievably beautiful. He didn't speak, but under the crow's eyelashes, those black eyes were silent as if they were dead. It was as if he knew that he had no hope of raising her back. After all, without a soul, even with the immortal meridian, he could only raise an unfamiliar spirit. Not his little fox. Suddenly, Wei Bai felt a slight chill on her body. She looked down and saw Wen Jinqian looking down. Under his cold eyes, a line of quiet tears slid down his chin and finally fell into the pond and disappeared. Chapter 2461. A faint line of tears. It touched his heart more than any words. Old monster Wen suddenly became Wen Xiao pitiful. He was not used to it. Wei Wei Bai helplessly reached out her leaf and touched his hair. Don't cry, I'm not a demon. It's just a breakup. With such a long lifespan, he could just find a cute fox. Who would want his life if he left? Life was the most important thing. Live well and improve every day. In the end, when Leaf reached out, she suddenly felt that something was wrong. She was stunned and realized that she had touched Wen Jinqian's hair. It was a white jade-like hand. It was as tender as a flower bud, and even its fingernails were soft and round. It had no ability to hurt. Wen Jinqian also moved his eyelashes as if he could not believe it. The sparkle that had been suppressed in his dark eyes gushed out. He just stared at her like that. In the huge lotus flower, the petals began to wither. The girl sat in the withered lotus flower. Her silver hair was curly and cute. Her round eyes had a hint of pure and festive light when she was not smiling. She seemed to have just woken up and her eyes were sleepy. Wen Jinqian did not dare to move and allowed the girl's body to lean softly on his shoulder. She was a little confused. Master. Wen Jinqian did not say anything. Was this a dream or the remnants of his obsession? After 9 bolts of mystic lightning, his obsession was completely eliminated. But his obsession was still deep in his bones. He often saw the little fox's shadow running beside him. When he went to the library, he was holding a book. He saw the sloppy little fox holding a pen and doodling on a book. She was not studying seriously at all. He should have hated this kind of lazy person the most. But he felt that she should be like this. She was so cute that he wanted to rub her hair. But when he stretched out his hand, it was just an afterimage. Or occasionally, he would walk to the cafeteria, ignoring the surprised and admiring eyes of the disciples. He would just sit quietly at the place where the little fox ate back then and fantasize that she still existed. He saw the afterimages many times. Instead, he was not so surprised. He even felt that without these afterimages, there would be no lotus flower that represented hope. He would have nothing. In the lotus flower was everything left of her. He couldn't find her soul. He could only hold on to the remains and ashes, hoping that he could raise her. At the bottom of the lotus pond was the soul congregation array that he had built with all his heart. Day and night were just calling for one person to return. He wouldn't force her anymore and wouldn't imprison her. Just to see her one more time. Take another look at her. Suddenly, when Jinqian came to a realization. He lowered his eyes and stared at her. He stared at her, from her beautiful unclear eyes to her red lips that were pursed in confusion. He felt that this afterimage was too real. Wei Wei Bai also stared at him, as if competing with him to see whose eyes were bigger. Then, she silently reached out to grab a large lotus petal and wrapped it around herself. Wei Wei Bai thought, it's a little cold without clothes. I need to wrap myself up. As for shyness or moral integrity, if you don't have those things, don't show them off. Since she was leaving in a month, she could just deal with Wen Jinqian. So she gave him a cute smile. Master, it's good that you're fine. It was a perfunctory and conventional greeting. Even a surprised expression wasn't professional. Wen Jinqian was silent for a while, as if he had finally confirmed something. His body leaned forward slightly, and his scattered clothes fell to his shoulders. His black hair snaked behind his back and fell into the pond water. The youth reached out and held her arm with his fingers. His fingertips gently pulled her into his arms. As if he was sure of something. His thick eyelashes drooped down, and the loneliness in his eyes turned into a gorgeous, flowing golden emotion. Then, he finally lowered his head. He kissed her. Chapter 2462. This kiss came suddenly. Wei Wei Bai instinctively wanted to step back, but he held her wrist tightly, as if he was afraid that she would disappear. Her eyelashes trembled, and there was a trace of astonishment and confusion in her eyes. But she could feel his surging excitement under his calmness. His fingertips were trembling, and the cold and distant darkness in his eyes was also occupied by broken light spots. Under the lotus leaves in the pool, countless buds suddenly appeared. The fragrance was strong. Just like the aura of the man in front of her. It was tempting and had a desire to destroy. And a tenderness that would never change until death. Wei Wei Bai wanted to struggle, but when she reached out and touched his chest, she found that his skin was trembling. Excitement, fear, and disbelief pulled this young man from a cold and holy god into the realm of mortals. He was still happy. Wei Wei Bai hesitated and finally breathed a sigh of relief. Her lips parted slightly, and she accepted his enthusiasm. The spirit stone door of the Heaven Sect's main hall. It finally opened slowly. Xian Yi stood by the waterfall with his sword in his arms. He looked at Su San coldly. Su San had just accepted the mystic thunder of the Middle Dashang stage and successfully advanced to the Middle Dashang stage. He was the disciple with the highest cultivation in the entire Heaven Sect. No, he couldn't be considered a disciple of the Heaven Sect. He was expelled from the sect. He could still remember the scene when he was expelled from the sect. In fact, at that time, his master wanted to kill him. But Su San cried out in grief, "She likes you, she has always liked you." This sentence saved his life. His master was also in a daze. He directly closed the spirit stone door and concentrated on cultivating the lotus. Everyone knew that their little sister couldn't be raised back. But they didn't dare to expose it. After all, a person who could be sore took out his own immortal vein just to keep this glimmer of hope. If the hope was shattered, that was almost unimaginable. Su San sat in the waterfall, and the water of the waterfall had the evil spirit of cultivating ice blades. Even a Dashang stage cultivator could feel severe pain sitting here for a long time. Su San had been sitting here for 10 years. It doesn't seem like it's here to cultivate, but more like a punishment from me. Just like that, the two Marshall brothers stood by the waterfall and watched. One sat in the waterfall and took a shower. This strange scene happened every day. It was about to become one of the best scenic spots in the Heavenly Gate sect. Suddenly, Su San opened his eyes and looked in the direction of the main hall in disbelief. Mystic One hesitated for a moment before looking over as well. He found the door open. The door that had not been open for so many years was now open. The two of them looked at each other, then turned into streaks of light and disappeared. By the time they arrived at the entrance, the rest of the disciples had also arrived. After all, it was rare for Shizhuan to leave the sect. Of course, they all wanted to see if their master was missing anything. It was not wrong to say that the entire Heavenly Gate sect was Wen Jinqian's fan club. When Wen Jinqian entered the demonic state previously, he killed all the Mahayana cultivators. It shocked the entire immortal cultivation world and caused many immortal cultivators to panic. They began to besiege the Heaven Sect. Then, they were all beaten back. The people of the Heavenly Gate sect looked calm. His master had turned into a demon. "What's wrong? I'm just going to beat you up." Their master was still their master. In the past 10 years, they had hardly seen Wen Jinqian. 10 years ago, when they wanted to raise the lotus, they needed a lot of heaven and earth treasures. They could often see Wen Jinqian go out and stroll around the library. Or the cafeteria. However, when they started to raise the lotus, he was gone. The huge spirit stone door opened halfway. Suddenly, behind the door, a pink hand gently rested on the side of the stone door. On the crystal clear stone door, the hand was slender and powerless, but it was exceptionally beautiful and exquisite. It was even a bit more crystal clear than the jade door. Everyone stared at the hand, almost unable to believe it. Wasn't this a girl's hand? Chapter 2463. It had been a long time since they had seen a woman in the Heavenly Gate sect. Ever since little junior sister was gone. Since then, no woman had been able to pass the entrance exam and enter the Heavenly Gate sect. Although little junior sister did not enter through an experiment. However, her uniqueness was one of a kind. Then, under everyone's strange and puzzled gazes, Wei Bai tilted her head curiously and appeared from behind the door. The sun outside the door was even brighter. She couldn't help but squint her round eyes. The sparkling orange light rippled in her eyes. She was exceptionally beautiful. Her silver curly hair had a faint pink color. It was like the color of the petals of a lotus flower. There was no fox aura on her. There was no human feeling. Instead, it was an exceptionally pleasant plant fragrance and the fragrance of lotus flowers. In the middle of her forehead, the lotus flower had already become a complete lotus flower. Master had placed his immortal meridian into her body. He had also sent his spiritual energy C into her forehead. The little fox, no, the little lotus flower. Her current ability was much higher than Susan's. When she saw them, she couldn't help but reveal a cute smile. Hello, senior brothers. This simple and annoying greeting. It blew away all the past grudges. The little fox's betrayal. It was to fulfill Wen Jinqian's immortal Dao. Later, to block the lightning tribulation for Master, she even died. This made the group of senior brothers feel sad and guilty when they saw her. Therefore, everyone was silent and didn't know what to say for a moment. Suddenly, a hand gently landed on Wei Bai's shoulder. The youth behind her appeared. His cold attitude turned into gentleness like a spring breeze. You don't have to call me senior brother in the future. You're already married to me. It should be them calling you Master's wife. When Jinqian's thin lips curled up slightly, and his eyes were filled with a gentle smile. Wei Bai was stunned for a moment, then she smiled even more brightly. She waved her hand and called, Xian Yi. Xian Yi, Wei Bai saw Su San again. She called out generously, Su San. The corners of Su San's mouth twitched. He had nothing to say. Chen Si, Nan Wu, a row of people called over. Everyone had a cold expression. When Jinqian held her hand and said calmly, call me Ma Am. Everyone immediately lowered their heads and respectfully called out, Mistress. Su San Chi paused for a moment. Then, as if he had thought of something, he could only sigh and softly call out, Master's wife. When Jinqian lowered his eyes to look at her, his slender fingers were intertwined with hers, one by one. Then he said, from now on, you're in charge here. Wei Bai tilted her head and stared at him for a long time. A trace of hesitation flashed through her eyes, but in the end, she didn't say anything and just smiled. When Jinqian pulled her and walked out of the door calmly. The Heavenly Gate sect was still surrounded by immortal energy and spiritual energy. Cranes chirped as hundreds of flowers bloomed. Their back view as they walked together was so warm that it moved people. Everyone was silent for a long time. Xian Yi finally said, I haven't seen Master smile for a long time. It was such a pure smile, and his eyes were full of warmth. Even before he'd met the little fox, he'd never seen him smile like this. Everything in the world seemed to have nothing to do with Master. Even his smile was disdainful and isolated from the mortal world. Then, everything changed. Su San hugged his sword and lowered his head. He snorted coldly. I will become stronger in the future. If he doesn't treat her well, he swallowed his words. He still had a grudge against Wen Jinqian. / next time you open the bookshelf, you'll see it. If you like. Chapter 2464. Especially when he heard that the little fox died to block the lightning tribulation. This was also why he worked so hard to improve, just to catch up with Wen Jinqian. Because at least he could get justice for the little fox. But there was no need for that now. Su San walked away expressionlessly. They were very good. He felt that he was going to fall into a situation of eating dog food again. Did it hurt? Don't ask. If you ask again, you will die alone. Wei Wei Bai found that although there were no ears on her head, lotus leaves would occasionally grow on her body. She had really turned into a lotus root. The system also said, "It smells good." Wei Wei Bai held her face. "Isn't it fragrant and beautiful? It feels like a peerless beauty when you smell it." System. No, it smells very good with pork ribs. The lotus root stewed pork rib soup is especially delicious. There's also pork stir-fried lotus root, cold lotus root slices with green onions, fresh lotus root shrimp porridge. Wei Wei Bai, is it an illusion? Why did I hear the system swallow? From animal to plant. Wei Wei Bai felt that she had been a drama queen for most of her life, but this was the first time she was a plant spirit. Smelling herself, she felt that it was delicious. So this was the reason why when Jinqian pressed on her from time to time, half forcefully lifted her chin, and kissed her as if he was hungry. Especially in a place like the library. Did he have a control of the venue? Wei Wei Bai stared at the young man's black eyes. His eyes were moist, the young man who fell from the top of the cold peak into the mortal world. Although he was still wearing a white robe. But there was a passion that she had never seen before. He seemed to have really become a young boy who fell in love for the first time. Even when he was choosing a dress for her, he had to ask carefully. Did she like it? She felt that when Jinqian was cute, even licking her dog. It was only a month's stay. Wei Wei Bai was leisurely, she did not cause any trouble at all. For example, she would torment him with an amnesia joke. Or she would make a heartless joke about going on a trip. In any case, she would do whatever Wen Jinqian did. There was no need to mention how comfortable their days were. Wen Jinqian, who was not possessed, still had a sense of abstinence. Her fair fingers picked up the brush and wrote in one go. He gently raised his head to look at her. His beautiful black eyes were clear and bright. Is this how to draw the advanced teleportation talisman? Wei Wei Bai leaned over the table and stared at the talisman for a while. Then, she pouted and sighed. I don't. When Jinqian saw her lying lazily on the bed, her silver curly hair casually draped over her thin back. Her watery eyes were smiling. How many years had it been? She had always been an illusion of his obsession. He stared at her in a daze for a while before softly saying with a smile, "It's fine if you don't know anything. I'll make more. If you want to use it, just take it." During this period of time, he had been teaching her some high-level arrays. But Wei Wei Bai was here to eat and wait for death. How could he study seriously? Therefore, she smiled and said, "Husband, if you know how to do it, why would I need to know this?" There was a hint of joy in Wen Jinqian's gentle eyes, but there was a hint of depression in his eyes. "All right, I'll prepare it for you." It was the Lantern Festival again. When Jinqian held Wei Wei Bai's hand and went to look at the lights. The bustling world was filled with smoke and fire. The colors of the lights fell on Wen Jinqian's exquisite face and the light in his eyes. It was like all the beautiful colors in the world. It was all on this young man. His smile was gentle, and the elegance of age was in his every move. Bai Weiwei still had 2 buns on her head, the red ribbon fluttering in the wind. She was holding a beautiful red bean cake. The red bean cake was covered with green leaves, and it was fresh and sweet. For the convenience of your next reading, you can click on the button below to record this reading record. Chapter 2465. Today was the last day she would stay here. The system said that her body would automatically degenerate and turn back into a lotus. Her soul would also return to reality. Weiwei Bai didn't feel much after hearing this. After all, they had gone back and forth to so many planes. She was used to it. So she still happily followed Wen Jinqian out to play. When Jinqian carried the rabbit lantern, the young man's face was too handsome. Even when he was carrying such a childish thing, he still looked like a painting. He gazed at her with a gentle expression. The girl lowered her head and ate the red bean cake. The 2 of them returned to normal and walked forward, but the atmosphere was a little more ambiguous. When they walked to the river, they saw countless wishing lamps floating away. Weiwei Bai didn't have any thoughts and was about to pass by. But she heard Wen Jinqian's low and gentle voice. "Let me make a wish." Weiwei Bai looked up at him. He had already stretched out his fingertips. A piece of paper appeared on the rabbit lantern, and the paper was hidden in the lantern. The young man quietly lowered his eyes. His eyelashes were half closed, and the shadows under his eyes brought out a gloomy darkness. He bent over, and his exquisite wrist bones were exposed from his sleeves. The beautiful rabbit lantern was gently touched by his fingertips. It floated far away. Weiwei Bai seemed to be a little curious. She tiptoed to see where her lantern had floated to. However, she saw Wen Jinqian standing by the water. His gaze was affectionate, and his features were gentle and exquisite. He stretched out his wrist, and a thread of love appeared on his wrist bone. The red thread was exceptionally beautiful. It was stained with the aura of the soul, and it looked even more lustrous. The deeper the emotion, the brighter the red thread. Weiwei, I hated this thing at first. No, to be exact. At first, he was disdainful and cold. When they first met. The first time he saw her, it was a faint fluctuation. At that time, he even had murderous intentions. Later, she died in the lightning tribulation. He hated this thing because he guessed that it was this thing. It caused the soul aura to exchange. The lightning tribulation mistook her for someone else and took her away. But when she reappeared from the lotus, he would be grateful. If this thing didn't exist. Connect their souls. Not to mention 100 years, even 10,000 years would not be enough to summon her soul back. Yes, it had been 100 years. He wanted to raise her from the very beginning. From the moment the seed fell into the pond until she began to turn into a lotus flower. Later on, it finally withered and woke up from the petals. A total of 100 years. She didn't know. Maybe she just felt like she had slept. No one told her how long 100 years of wind and rain was. In the past, he might have thought that it wasn't long. Crossover system, Adonis, come here. /crossover system, Adonis, come here and read the full article at https://www.sashu.com. Download Transmigration system, Adonis, come here and read on your phone, https://m/sashu.com. To facilitate your next reading, you can click on the Transmigration system, Adonis, come here. Chapter 2466. After all, in the cultivation world, time was worthless. Occasionally, a major seclusion could last hundreds of years. But to him, this 100 years was more difficult than the previous 700 years. It was even too long. It was so long that he thought he was extremely old. Sometimes, he would be terrified and grab his hair to look. Had it turned white? Little Fox would definitely like a young man. Not an old man. He saw the little fox looking at him with a puzzled expression. Her round, watery eyes were still pure. When Jinqian didn't explain too clearly and just smiled. But now, I like this line very much. Wei Wei Bai looked at the time. It was already past 11 o'clock. She was going to leave. She didn't want to turn into a lotus in front of Wen Jinqian. She said with a smile, Wen Jinqian, I'm going to buy a lamp and make a wish like you. Wen Jinqian stared at her silently for a while before revealing a smile. The young man's thin lips were exquisite and slightly cold. His eyes were dark and pure. When his smile spread, it was filled with the broken shadows of the joyful lights. He said, Okay, Wei Wei. Wei Wei Bai immediately jumped up and down, her long ribbon swaying behind her. She ran to the most prosperous place in the world. Her footsteps were filled with joy. When Jinqian still stood in place, his body began to shatter. He was already dead. He snatched a soul destined to disappear from the heavenly Tao. He asked what price he had to pay. With immortal meridians, soul, and eternal fortune. Amazing talent, intelligent spiritual aura. Strong physical body, abundant spiritual aura in the sea of consciousness. Everything about him. He threw himself into the lotus one by one. Let her grow. Heavenly materials and earthly treasures were just a foundation. He had used everything he had to exchange for everything she had. 100 years ago, he had used up everything he had. In exchange, the lotus began to grow. In fact, 100 years ago, he had nothing and should have died. He only relied on the red line on his wrist, which was closely related to her soul aura. He deceived the heavenly Tao and let his lifespan drag on for 100 years. And when he finally changed her back, it was time for him to disappear. The youth stared at her back as she left. His beautiful fingertips began to disperse into light spots. The note in the lamp behind him. It was just his simple wish. I only hope that you can live happily for a very, very long time. I don't ask that you remember me, and you don't need to love me anymore. I just need to love you. The young man's vision began to disappear. His black eyelashes became transparent, and his eyes were filled with countless specks of light. The lights were brilliant, and he had become the light within them. He remembered that there were countless storage bags in the main hall of the Heaven sect. There was also the secret manual for opening the secret realm. He gave her everything he had. She didn't know how to draw charms, so he drew many charms for her to use. She didn't know how to use arrays, but he made many arrays for her to use. There were even absolute orders given to the disciples of the Heavenly Gate sect. The entire Heavenly Gate sect did everything they could to protect her. Of course, he had already kicked Su San away. This was his last bit of jealousy. When Jinqian thought, what else is there to do? Perhaps no one else would be as protective of the little fox as he was in the future. What a pity. He sighed faintly, then revealed a smile. The slender and beautiful youth had completely disappeared. As for Bai Weiwei, who bought a lamp, her heart moved and she frowned. The system said, let's go, it's time. Weiwei Bai couldn't help but look back. She didn't know where Wen Jinqian had gone. However, without seeing her turn into a lotus, the impact might not be so great. She closed her eyes, and her soul disappeared on the spot. Only a small lotus fell to the ground. The lotus was boiling with immortal aura, protected by the array, and mortals couldn't see it. And Su San, who had been following the two but didn't dare to get too close because of Wen Jinqian. When he noticed that when Jin Qian had disappeared, he rushed over. He saw the scene of the little fox turning into a lotus. When he held little lotus in his hands, tears started to fall. Because everything of his master was in the lotus. He had cultivated to this stage, what else did he not understand? These two people, in the end, only left this lotus. The lights were still there, but Hua Jiao and Yixing were not there. // Chapter 2467. The system trembled as it hugged the warm gloves it had woven. Its small body struggled to follow the big boss in front of it. In the darkness, a galaxy-like path appeared. Yi Yuxuan's slender back looked exceptionally tall and powerful in the silver light. It was just that the temperature around him was a little cold. The system felt that Boss Yi had been tortured by the host this time. So when he died and turned into a soul, he became angry. After all, the torture this time was too long and too miserable. The host slept like a pig and didn't care at all. It didn't see how this boss was tortured. After the lightning tribulation. That 100 years was simply a sad memory of torturing the big boss. To let the host's soul come back. Not to mention that the time status was stuck in the pending state. When Jin Qian was willing to work hard without complaint. He put in everything he had to nurture the lotus. It was not easy for the model worker to raise his little cutie. He was going to die. So be it. In the end, when he died, he realized that he had turned from a model worker to a model worker. 100 years of hard work was kicked away by Wei Bai. He left just like that. The system didn't dare to say that he watched when Jin Qian disappear. Yi Yuxuan's soul appeared in place. In the bustling lights, his soul power was incomparable and radiated in all directions. Then, under the gaze of this powerful power, Wei Bai left his body casually, letting everything that was condensed from 100 years of hard work. He retreated back into a lotus. At that time, he saw Yi Yuxuan's expression, that gloomy and cold. In the past, at least the time was short. No matter how much effort was spent, it would at most be 100 years. Of course, there were special planes that took a longer time. But for a cultivation plane to grow to such an extent, it took so much effort. In the end, before he died, he was still gratified that he had raised a flower. He could live happily for a while. In the end, as soon as he left, his soul awakened and he saw Bai Wuqing leave. Even if Wei Bai lived for 3 more days, Yi Yuxuan would come back slowly. It wouldn't have made Boss Ye's face turn black now. Everyone had a buffer period. This time, Yi Yuxuan's soul chased after him and slept in Wen Jinqian's body. That was why Wen Jinqian did everything. Yi Yuxuan had a very deep understanding of this. It was almost as if she had done it herself. The depth of this kind of immersion was something that Wei Bai, who was heartless and had an emotional shield, could not imagine. It was no wonder that Yi Yuxuan couldn't recover in time. His face darkened the entire time. After all, his current mood swings were much more intense than before. The system suddenly stepped on his pants and almost fell over. When he finally steadied himself, he looked up. What about Yi Yuxuan? Where was his host? The space storm blew past, brushing past the system's face. The system was silent for a long time before it finally exploded. Yi Yuxuan took his host away again. Where did she go? Was he up to no good? Was it going to eat her soul? Now that the host's soul is the lotus root, the pork rib soup is delicious. That was not the main point. The main point was, where was his host? Wei Bai woke up. A lonely gust of wind blew past. A few bones rolled past her feet. This was a gloomy place. This was a place where bones were piled up. She slowly looked up and saw a rusty iron sword. The beautiful and ancient patterns were covered in a thick layer of rust, and within the rust were traces of dried black blood. Beside the iron sword was a familiar throne. The bones were pieced together. It was pale, but it did not feel ghostly at all. Chapter 2468. Instead, it was a cold and powerful aura that came head-on. This aura made Wei Wei Bai feel goosebumps rise on her skin. What made her eyes twitch even more was the man sitting on the skeleton throne. His long black hair, with a dark luster, quietly fell on his shoulders. The beautiful man's eyelashes were slightly lowered, and the golden light under his thick eyelashes was frozen. There was only a kind of heartless coldness on his cold and exquisite face. He was like a golden-eyed king frozen in ice and snow. He looked at the living beings under his feet emotionlessly. He could destroy the world with a raise of his hand at any time. Wei Wei Bai was stunned. She felt that this man's face was a little familiar. Yi Yuxuan. But it was very similar, but there were also differences. After all, she was so familiar with Yi Yuxuan. This man sitting here. She could still tell whether it was him or not. It was just a person who looked a little like Yi Yuxuan. Or a ghost. She sat on the bone mountain and felt uncomfortable. She tried to move a little. But she found that the golden light in the man's eyes flowed. It seemed that he was about to wake up. She instinctively felt that this guy was not to be trifled with. She seemed to have seen him last time. After that, she never saw him again. She thought that she was having a nightmare. So she threw it to the back of her mind. But now she saw him again, and every time she woke up, she did not have the system. She should have returned to reality. Could it be that she fell here because of some accident? Was this the gray area between reality and the plane? Wei Wei Bai had experienced the cultivation plane, and many possibilities flashed through her mind. Or maybe the system accidentally used the small world built by that big boss as its own path. That was why it accidentally let her come here. Wei Wei Bai slowly stood up. The eyelashes of the man on the throne moved. But he did not move. She found that he seemed to be resting, so his body could not move. Wei Wei Bai took a few steps back. She found that he did not react. Then she boldly turned around and ran forward. He had to find the system first. Being trapped here made him feel uneasy. With great difficulty, she finally stepped over a few skulls and was about to descend the mountain. However, he found that the skeletons suddenly stood up shakily. He stood up. Those bones seemed to be pulled by some kind of power and pieced together into countless skeletons. They were all here for Wei Wei Bai. A huge beast-like skeleton looked up to the sky and roared. Then, it stomped on the skeleton mountain. Step by step, he crushed the bones and rushed towards Wei Wei Bai. Wei Wei Bai, fuck, husky, you scared me to death. She broke into a run, and the skeletons followed her. Wei Wei Bai, who was most afraid of ghosts, felt that this was the scariest scene she had ever encountered. She covered her head and scurried to the side of the throne, only to find that she had run back. Damn it, there was a wolf in front and a tiger behind. Just as she was about to make a turn, she realized that the running skeletons had stopped. They seemed to be afraid as they took a few steps back. Then, they lay on the ground, trembling. In hindsight, Bai Weiwei looked at the throne. However, she found that the man had already opened his eyes. His golden eyes were as beautiful as flowing gold. He stared quietly at Wei Wei Bai. His eyes were cold and calm, deep and gorgeous. There was also a hint of suppressed anger. Wei Wei Bai laughed dryly and then took a few steps back. Then, she found that as she stepped back, all the skeletons were looking at her. /T. Chapter 2469. Every time she took a step back, the skulls would take a step forward. Wei Wei Bai could only move to the man's side. She thought that the man was also a ghost, and a big ghost that was a leader. Maybe the next second, he would peel off his face and reveal his skull. But she found that the man stared at her indifferently for a while, and then slowly lowered his eyes and ignored her. Wei Wei Bai always had a feeling that this guy was angry. And he was angry with her, so he wanted to give her a cold war. She didn't know him. She didn't want to be like an ex-boyfriend who came to find trouble with her after breaking up. When the man lowered his eyes again, the skulls seemed to have received some kind of encouragement. The eerie white boned claws crawled forward bit by bit. They looked at Wei Wei Bai with greedy and terrifying eyes, as if the skulls didn't have eyes. But Wei Wei Bai saw it. They wanted to eat her. System, where did you go? Your host is going to be eaten. She couldn't call the system back, so she could only retreat step by step. Until she suddenly bumped into something with her heel. It was a little cold, a little hard. Just as she was about to turn around, she saw the biggest bestial skull howl. It scared Wei Wei Bai so much that she fell back and sat directly into a cold embrace that made people shiver. She froze and found that the place she bumped into was a man's foot. And the place she was sitting now was a man's thigh. The man's embrace was like a cold and hard embrace. There was no trace of life. There was also no warmth like blood flowing. There was also no heartbeat, pulse, or the breath of human life. In any case, it was similar to a stone. Was it really a ghost? Wei Wei Bai immediately stiffened and didn't dare to move. And those skulls also didn't dare to move. They just lay there and stared at Wei Wei Bai, but none of them dared to come up to eat her. Wei Wei Bai's intuition told her. These things were very dangerous, and they really wanted to eat her. Even if it was a skull, she could see their strange and greedy expressions. This nightmare was truly long and terrifying. Wei Wei Bai sat there awkwardly while the man behind her lowered his eyes indifferently. He seemed to be asleep. After sitting for a long time, she was bored and couldn't help but turn around to look. She saw him looking down as if he was deep in thought. A faint glimmer of light flashed through those beautiful, golden eyes. But it was hard to tell what kind of emotions they were feeling. His unbelievably beautiful face was much more exquisite than Yi Yuxuan's. She thought that Yi Yuxuan was good-looking enough. He hadn't expected to find an upgraded version of Yi Yuxuan. However, it was precisely because it was too beautiful and exquisite that it felt unreal. It was so unreal that it didn't seem human at all. Wei Wei Bai couldn't help but think about Yi Yuxuan at the beginning. In fact, it also looked like a robot. But compared to this man, Yi Yuxuan was a robot. But sometimes, it was quite cute. Even if he was a robot, he was still a human. He still had the warmth of a human and certain characteristics of a human. But this man didn't have a single trace of dust in him. She didn't like it. Because she was thinking about things, she stared at him for too long. The man's eyelashes moved, and a trace of intense fluctuation appeared in his golden eyes. It was as if something was struggling, and then a trace of softness appeared in his calm golden eyes. A flash of gentleness, a soul aura that made an exquisite puppet come to life. Wei Wei Bai looked at him in surprise. A hand suddenly pressed down on the back of her neck and pressed her against his chest. T. Chapter 2470. His chest was hard and firm, and there was no heartbeat. It made Wei Wei Bai panic. The man's other hand crossed her waist, and his strong arm trapped her in his arms. His delicate thin red lips pressed against her fair and small ear, and his breath was cold. "You make me angry." The man's voice was low and cold, with a trace of elegant magnetism. "I'll be angry here for 3 minutes before I let you go." He was afraid that when he returned to reality, he would not be able to recover and would be cold to her. He could not bear to be angry with her. He could only bring her here and let her accept her punishment. He could only wake up for a few minutes in this cold and noble body. This was the data he obtained after many tests. After a few minutes, his consciousness would disappear. Before his consciousness disappeared in this body, he would bring her back to reality. "Wei Bai, boss, who are you?" "I don't know you." The man pressed her down and hugged her quietly. There were skulls all around. The seat was a skeleton. The wind was cold. Wei Bai was dumbfounded. Just when she thought that she would never wake up from this nightmare, the man suddenly grabbed her waist and carried her up. Then by the time Wei reacted, he had already placed her on the wide, white-boned seat. Wei Bai leaned against the back seat, and there was still a thigh bone. Damn it, she wanted to go home. Then, she watched as the man effortlessly pulled out the iron sword beside the throne. The rust was still there, and the smell of blood did not change. The tip of the sword swept gently in front of him, and the awakened skulls were shattered into powder and scattered in all directions. This quiet place regained its calm and dead aura. He casually inserted the iron sword into the place where it was just now, and then turned around. His cold and exquisite face was so calm that it was as if what happened just now was just a breath. The anger in his eyes also disappeared. Wei Bai looked at him lowering his head, and his black hair fell on her body. There was a trace of human vitality in his golden eyes. "Okay, go to sleep." After saying that, he reached out and pressed her eyes. She leaned against the chair and fell asleep. Yi Yuxuan stood up again. He closed his eyes and separated himself from this powerful and exquisite body. A beautiful and powerful soul reappeared beside Wei Bai. The golden-eyed king stood silently beside the sword. Yi Yuxuan glanced at him expressionlessly before reaching out to hug Wei Bai. She turned back into a white soul ball and quietly nestled in his arms. Yi Yuxuan turned around and was about to leave when she suddenly realized something and quickly disappeared. And at the place where he had just been standing, the iron sword was stuck there. If he hesitated for even a second, his soul would be destroyed. When Yi Yuxuan reappeared, she was already in midair. His body, which had been standing just a moment ago, had quietly returned to his throne. He raised his head, but there was a trace of confusion in his cold and emotionless eyes. Yi Yuxuan also narrowed her eyes. Was this the powerful consciousness that could suppress him? When he first entered this body, he was suppressed by a terrifyingly powerful consciousness. This consciousness was filled with endless killing, a crazy and twisted bloody aura, an ancient and distant majesty, and a cold and inhumane cruelty. If he didn't have the love left behind by Wei Bai in his heart, he might have been swallowed up. Yi Yuxuan calmly analyzed that the consciousness in this body was related to him. In fact, it was once one with him. Chapter 2471. This kind of analysis required more explorations before it could be verified. Yi Yuxuan hugged Wei Tuanzi and slowly retreated. The man sitting on the throne looked at him coldly. He didn't seem to be fully awake. His golden eyes were cold and empty. But it was enough to make people feel fear. Yi Yuxuan wasn't afraid. He protected Wei Tuanzi and calmly analyzed. He knew that he couldn't beat this guy. And, Yi Yuxuan looked at the man's wrist. There was a red line. That red line was connected to Wei Bai's wrist. The red lines of the three of them were intertwined. Dead knots were tied one after another. Unless it was forcefully broken, it would be impossible to undo them. Yi Yuxuan retreated step by step. His calm heart was filled with all kinds of data analysis. The system, who rushed over, forcibly raised its height and activated its greatest strength. Zhang Yang's red hair was like a lion's head. The young man's slender body was strong and agile like a leopard. He bared his teeth and rolled up his sleeves, ready to fight with Yi Yuxuan. The chosen one was amazing. It was good enough that he hugged the host. The host's soul disappeared just like that. Where was the system's dignity? Even if he couldn't beat Yi Yuxuan, for the sake of dignity. Wait a minute. How did Yi Yuxuan's human nature and divinity conflict? The system braked quickly and saw a scene that made its liver and guts burst. The terrifying guy on the throne was looking up at Yi Yuxuan in midair. This was the place where Yi Yuxuan's power was. The man on the throne was the condensation of Yi Yuxuan's divinity. Divinity was heartless, emotionless, sad, and happy. It only had the intention to kill. Yi Yuxuan, on the other hand, was a human nature that was forcefully pried out by the host. The power of human nature was definitely weaker than divinity. No matter what kind of power it was the same person. But it was just like schizophrenia, even if it was the same person. There were also times when the strong and the weak would fight each other. Yi Yuxuan loved Wei Wei Bai. This was only natural. After all, she had been abused by the host in so many planes, so she had developed a deep love for him. Humans were just that pretentious. The more they were tortured, the more they loved them. What could he do? But Yi Yuxuan's divine power had no feelings. When the time came, Yi Yuxuan would return to his real body. Divine power would definitely devour human nature. This was also why he knew that in the future, Yi Yuxuan would definitely forget about the host. Because the divine Yi Yuxuan would not love its host. But what was going on? There was no need to talk about the intersecting red lines. Yi Yuxuan had the power of divinity. She was the queen of golden eyes. Why do you look so unhappy? Are those ripples of emotion in your eyes? How could the power of divinity have emotions? Thinking back to the past, the power of divinity had repeatedly tried to pull Wei Wei Bai's soul over. The system thought that it was because of Yi Yuxuan's human nature. But Yi Yuxuan automatically separated herself. Why did the power of divinity still have emotions? And it looked like it wanted to fight with Yi Yuxuan. You guys are one body, so what's the point of fighting? Aren't you just hitting yourself? Suddenly, it realized something. Yi Yuxuan and the man on the throne looked at the system at the same time. That gloomy gaze of death seemed to feel that the system had disturbed them. The system, who had rolled up its sleeves and was about to fight, was silent for a moment. It suddenly tiptoed back and disappeared with a whoosh. Host, take care. He was about to risk his life fighting with Yi Yuxuan's human nature. In the end, Yi Yuxuan's divine power had also awakened. He really couldn't beat it. He wouldn't get involved in this complicated heterosexual relationship. You're the boss, you can do whatever you want. Yi Yuxuan also took this opportunity and disappeared with Wei Wei Bai, returning directly to reality. The land of bones was still cold and desolate. The man sitting on the throne slowly lowered his eyes. A strange fluctuation appeared in his calm golden eyes. He slowly opened his fingers. In the center of his palm, a doll appeared. It was a cute version of Wei Wei Bai, smiling brightly. The man looked at it for a long time, then closed his palm again. Then, he continued to look down in silence. It was as if all the emotional fluctuations were just an illusion. And the red line on his wrist was incomparably bright. Download the https://www.sashu.com/download the full article, https://www.sashu.com download the full article, https://www.sashu.com download the full article, https://sashu.com/. Chapter 2472. Bai Weiwei flipped over like a sparrow hawk and got up from the bed. Her sleepy eyes were misty, a few strands of hair were standing up, and there were red marks on her fair face from sleeping. She looked unusually cute and confused. What happened? Where was the skull? Where was the man who looked like Yi Yuxuan but was more handsome? Or was it a male ghost? She looked around and found that she was on her own bed in reality. The familiar decoration style, the clean and sweet room, and the fresh-cut flowers at the bedside. Weiwei Bai touched her head and thought for a long time with a calm face. She felt that the dream was very strange. Could it be that she had been coveting Yi Yuxuan for so long that even her nightmares were about Yi Yuxuan? Right, where was Yi Yuxuan? The system said secretly, he's being interrogated in the living room. Weiwei Bai, what? Who dares to interrogate Yi Yuxuan? Who would have the guts? She didn't even dare to interrogate him. Unless he cheated. Yes. Weiwei Bai narrowed her beautiful eyes. This kind of mentality was not good, although they were both hot. But there was the strategy system in between, and there was also the problem of lifespan and other hardcore issues. So they were not hot enough. So even if Yi Yuxuan was with someone else, it could not be said that he cheated. At most, it would be a change of heart. Her awkward identity was not suitable to interrogate him. She had even kicked away the title of fiancé and fiancé. She could not just eat back the identity that Yi Yuxuan liked someone else. That would damage her noble character. So why was she thinking about this kind of problem? Shouldn't she be curious about who was interrogating Yi Yuxuan? The system saw her curiosity and said secretly, your doctor, your father, and a nurse. Weiwei Bai's brain was filled with a violent drama in a flash. Could it be that the nurse's pregnancy was actually Qin Qiu's? But Qin Qiu was unwilling to admit it and framed Yi Yuxuan, before he could finish his melodramatic thoughts. The system said, Yi Yuxuan took the sleeping pills for the second time. Qin Qiu is jumping up and down. He even asked the nurse to bring in the medical equipment and insisted on checking his body condition. This time, after Yi Yuxuan woke up, she refused to go to the hospital. So Qin Qiu was at his wit's end. As for Bai Changyan, he was just a bystander. After all, 3 days had passed and his daughter had woken up. Furthermore, the Yi family's food was quite delicious. If there was a chance, the food that son-in-law Yi personally cooked would be delicious. Weiwei Bai hurriedly jumped off the bed, hurriedly changed into her pajamas, and put on a dress. Did Yi Yuxuan take things too hard? Did I leave her hanging too much? Is that why he felt hopeless in love and wanted to die? System, the host's skin had always been so beautiful and thick. He shouldn't be surprised. Was Yi Dada the kind of person who would die for love? The system thought of the emotional fragments of those perverted affectionate people in the plane. Okay, yes. Weiwei Bai opened the door and saw on the opposite side, on the long pinecone sofa. Yi Yuxuan's face was a little pale, sitting quietly on the sofa. The young man's beautiful side face, under the sunlight from the window, appeared hazy and white, with a delicate feeling of unreality. He was holding a coffee cup in his hand. The bone porcelain cup was painted with ink, which set off his fair and delicate fingertips, almost glowing. Qin Qiu's back was facing Wei Wei Bai, and he reached out to knock on the table and shouted, "What are you thinking about? Say it, it's the second time. You slept for 3 days and took dozens of sleeping pills. Are you planning to soar to become an immortal?" The download address is at https://www.sashu.com. Chapter 2473. The system that didn't dare to speak. Yes, his soul did just become an immortal and soar. Yi Yuxuan didn't say anything, calmly drinking his coffee. He didn't care at all what Qin Qiu was shouting. He couldn't drink too much coffee right now, it was too bad for his stomach. Under his somewhat messy black hair, his eyes were cold, with a trace of imperceptible tiredness. The coffee forcibly refreshed him. What did Qin Qiu want to shout again? Yi Yuxuan faintly raised his eyes, a few more glimmers of light in his dark and cold eyes. But it seemed even more desolate. "Wei Wei hasn't woken up yet, your voice is too high. Although there is sound insulation here, a noisy environment will obviously affect my girl." "My girl." How could Yi Yuxuan say such a mushy name in such a calm and natural tone? Wei Wei Bai felt that she was already a weird old aunt. She was moved, so I'm still a little girl. She looked so delicate, cute, and beautiful that she could be regarded as a girl. Women always like to be young girls, no, to be younger, girls are better. System, vomit, this kind of poisonous and disgusting dog food, he didn't want to eat it. Damn, Yi Yuxuan must have been affected by the previous plane. Because in Wen Jinqian's heart in the previous plane, Wei Wei Bai was a little girl. But the reality also called her that, it was really too hard to explain. Qin Qiu was also stuck, after all, this kind of shameless and mushy name, my girl. From Yi Yuxuan's calm and indifferent mouth. The contrast was really too big. Those who didn't know would think that Yi Yuxuan was talking about his daughter. A stench of dog food hit him coldly. Qin Qiu hurriedly waved his hand desperately in his mind to get rid of the dog food. Then he said coldly, "If you have something to say, you can tell me. If you don't tell me, how am I supposed to know why you wanted to commit suicide?" Yi Yuxuan sipped her coffee calmly. Her lips were a little pale. She pursed the edge of the porcelain cup, showing a trace of fragility. After finishing his coffee, he said calmly, "I'm in good shape." Qin Qiu sneered, "How good can it be? All of your body's functional data are lower than normal. If you don't feel nauseous and dizzy after waking up, you can be considered to be able to bear it. No, a normal person would have already ascended to heaven." Yi Yuxuan put the bone porcelain cup on the table without any emotion. He calmly reached out and pinched the space between his eyebrows. His head did hurt a little. It wasn't the sleeping pill's fault. It was the after effects of facing that strange golden-eyed man. He suddenly stopped what he was doing. He raised his eyelashes slightly and looked through the gaps between his fingers. She saw Wei Wei Bai standing at the door. It was obvious that she had just woken up. She had changed into a dress, but she had forgotten to button the top button, revealing her white neck and faintly discernible collarbone. The light red checkered dress was fresh and elegant. She looked at him thoughtfully, her eyes containing a trace of strange scrutiny. Her body was still thin, but her momentum was getting stronger and stronger. Originally, she appeared slender because of her illness, but now there was a sense of coldness and refinement. It seemed that those dreams didn't just affect him. In fact, she was also infected. Yi Yuxuan calmly put down his fingers, pursed his thin lips, and said in a low voice, "Wei Wei, wake up." Wei Wei Bai looked at Qin Qiu with an anxious face. Then she looked at Bai Changyan with a confused face. Finally, she looked at Yi Yuxuan with a calm face. Then she calmly touched her stomach. I'm hungry. Yi Yuxuan nodded indifferently, then got up. Her fingers casually rolled up the cuffs of her sleeves, revealing her white wrists. Chapter 2474. Then without saying a word, she went straight to the kitchen. The cook washed the vegetables. Yi Yuxuan cooked by himself. He rarely cooked by himself, but if Wei Bai asked, he would do it himself. For him, cooking was just a matter of looking at the recipe and then accurately copying the finished product. It was not difficult. Seeing Yi Yuxuan enter the kitchen, Wei Bai sat down casually, sitting in the position where Yi Yuxuan just sat. She asked calmly, "What's wrong with Xian Xian?" Qin Qiu whispered excitedly, "He took dozens of sleeping pills, the second time." Wei Bai frowned, "Is his body okay?" Qin Qiu was silent for a moment, then looked at the nurse next to him. The nurse immediately shook her head. "There is no life-threatening reaction, only his physical fitness is lower than normal." Wei Bai nodded. "Later, I'll take him to the hospital. If he's okay, don't force him to say anything." In fact, she just didn't want Yi Yuxuan to drive Qin Qiu crazy. Seeing Qin Qiu so excited and worried, while Yi Yuxuan was completely indifferent, she panicked for Qin Qiu. She was really worried that one day Qin Qiu and Yi Yuxuan would turn against each other. After all, who has been with an emotionless machine for a long time? No matter how much feelings they had, they would be worn away. Qin Qiu's identity was also special. The Yi family was a century-old family. It was full of branches and leaves. And Qin Qiu's generation was infinitely distant from the Yi family. But reluctantly, Qin Qiu was a grandson of the Qi family who had no relationship with his uncle. He was a generation older than Yi Yuxuan. Although the Yi family looked at strength, not seniority. But it was normal for Yi Yuxuan to call Qin Qiu uncle. Because Qin Qiu began to treat Yi Yuxuan's emotional deficit until now. It had been 10 years. He had been paying attention to Yi Yuxuan's illness since he was 18 years old. Even if Yi Yuxuan had no feelings for her, she still called him respectfully. Now, Yi Yuxuan began to feel emotional fluctuations. He hadn't seen many decent brothers around him that he could get along with. If Qin Qiu was gone, what if he regrets it in the future? Sigh, ever since she decided to devote herself to Yi Yuxuan, she really had to worry about his friendship. Qin Qiu frowned with a helpless expression. Finally, under the calm gaze of Wei Bai, he wiped his tears and said, "You don't know, little Wei, Xian Xian really hurt my heart. He ruined his own body like this, how can I face his dead parents?" Wei Bai. Yi Yuxuan's parents are dead. Oh, it was probably when she was his fiancée. He had a slight impression that it was difficult to kill a machine. Qin Qiu sighed, "And if he doesn't live to be 70 years old, how can I take out my 1 billion assets?" Wei Bai, who was still moved by his feelings for Yi Yuxuan. "Wait, say that again. What is 1 billion assets?" Qin Qiu said with a deep melancholy face, "When I first saw him, my father said to me that the Yi family had done a great favor to the Qin family, and I must repay the favor." Wei Bai, so you're here to repay the favor? The 1 billion just now was a slip of the tongue, it must be. In fact, it was because of the strong brotherhood that he was so anxious. Qin Qiu grinned, "Who in this day and age wants to repay the favor from 180 years ago? It's none of my business." Wei Bai, Qin Qiu pulled a long face again. "In the end, my father said that if I cured Xian Xian, I could inherit the family property. My family has a whole 1 billion in the bank, and it's still cash." By Wei. At the slash to read at https://www.sashu Comat https://www. Sashu. Com to read the at https://m. Sashu. Com. Chapter 2475. Qin Qiu's face was tangled. In the end, Xian couldn't be cured. My father could only take a step back and said that if I could guarantee that he would live to 70, I could get the family property. Wei Bai, Qin Qiu, 1 billion. Wei Bai, don't say 1 billion. She wants to lose her memory. Screw your friendship. Qin Qiu saw her shocked face. Suddenly he laughed. No, you really believe such a lousy reason. Although I can't make 1 billion, it's easy to live a rich life. If I really live to 70, I'll be so old that my teeth will fall out. Even if you give me 10 billion, it's useless. Wei Bai stretched out her hand and rubbed her face tiredly. Oh, so you're so worried about his health because of your love for him. Qin Qiu laughed and clapped his hands. Yes, he's my brother. If I'm not worried about his health, who is? But my father did say that if he cured him, he would give me 1 billion. Wei Bai, he has feelings now, he should get better. Qin Qiu, I know, so I called my father a few days ago and asked him to prepare 1 billion for me. Wei Bai, Qin Qiu said to himself, so Xian has to survive these few days and let my father see him healthy. Wei Bai silently got up and pulled out a decorative ancient sword from the wall. The blade swayed and she rushed to Qin Qiu with the sword. Bai Changyan immediately stopped her. My daughter, your uncle Qin is also anxious, so he speaks without thinking. Don't be angry. Wei Bai's face darkened. No dinner tonight, only the head. He even joked about Yi Yuxuan's health problems. Did he think she was dead? Wei Bai with the sword kicked old Father Bai and Qin Qiu out. The door was slammed shut. Seeing that the nurse was still there, she opened the door again. The nurse obediently bowed her head and walked out faster than anyone else. The door was closed again. Several people lined up in a line and stood at the door. Finally, Old Man Bai said, is it okay to joke like this? Uncle Qin said, I thought the atmosphere was too serious, so I wanted to liven it up a bit. Who knew that Wei would be so easily teased? Old Man Bai, isn't she worried about her man's health? Uncle Qin said, yes, our daughter really likes Xian. After saying that, he felt that there was something strange about the way he addressed her. Wei Bai carried her sword and chased them away with a dark expression. She was still in a bad mood because she was even hungrier. She turned around and saw Yi Yuxuan wiping the water off her fingers with a handkerchief as she walked out of the kitchen. He calmly glanced at the sword in her hand. His dark and calm eyes did not have a trace of strange fluctuation. On the other hand, Wei Bai shamelessly put the sword back. Yi Yuxuan's eyes were indifferent, but she couldn't help but smile. His tone became gentle. Time to eat. Wei Bai immediately ran off to eat. After they finished eating, the sky had turned dark. Wei Bai came out of the shower. She racked her brains but could not figure out why Yi Yuxuan suddenly wanted to take sleeping pills. Could it be that he encountered something that made him unhappy? She walked into the living room and saw that Yi Yuxuan's face was a little pale. He looked down at the documents calmly. She heard that after sleeping for 3 days this time, there were more documents. Old Man Bai came today not only to see his daughter, but also to drag half a car full of documents. He was thick-skinned enough to ask his son-in-law to deal with them. Wei Bai walked over and opened the documents. Then she stared at him. Yi Yuxuan's expression was still calm, but he pressed his lips together a little harder. His thin lips had lost their healthy color. He stretched out his fingers and touched the documents on the table. but he did not open them. Her beautiful fingertips also gave off a thin and transparent feeling. Wei Wei Bai finally asked in a serious tone, "Why did you suddenly take sleeping pills?" Yi Yuxuan lowered his eyes to hide the tightness in his eyes. After thinking for a while, he finally looked up again. His eyes were obscure, his complexion was so delicate that it was unhealthy, and his thin red lips were a little dry. After a long silence, he finally said hesitantly, "I can't sleep." /save button at the bottom to record this reading. Chapter 2476. Yi Yuxuan, who had always dealt with everything without changing his expression. When he said this, his fingers couldn't help but clench. His calm face didn't show a trace of inappropriate expression, but the strength of his fingertips added a trace of nervousness. Wei Wei Bai felt that this answer was a little unexpected. This wasn't the first time he had taken sleeping pills. Last time, he had fooled her by saying that he wanted to experience the feeling of sleeping longer with sleeping pills. This wasn't something Yi Yuxuan would do. He was just short of putting a computer on his face. Everything that entered his eyes was a calculation of data. How could he let himself take so many pills because of a wrong estimation? Wei Wei Bai looked at him calmly and finally said, "Is it really insomnia?" Yi Yuxuan knew that if he showed a trace of something wrong, she would definitely be able to tell. Just like if she lied, she wouldn't be professional enough. He could easily see through it. So his expression was still calm. His beautiful black eyes quietly looked up, clear and beautiful. His deep voice had a hint of husky magnetism because of depression. "Yes, insomnia. It's the first time in my life that I've encountered such a problem. I'm a little helpless." His tone was clearly so calm. Yi Yuxuan's cold face didn't have a trace of fragile expression. Even his sitting posture still had the strong temperament of a superior. On his neat sleeves, the golden cufflinks reflected a light. A noble and elegant man, even if he said something that made him feel helpless. He didn't feel the slightest bit uneasy. Wei Wei Bai pursed her lips, which looked even more delicate and bright red. She asked softly, "When did you start to have insomnia?" Yi Yuxuan's eyes moved. He tapped the table with his fingertips and said calmly, "More than a month." It was a conservative time. He tried his best not to let his lie reveal any flaws. He didn't want to lie to her, even if it was for her own good. But he couldn't tell the truth. After all, whether it was that thing that was neither male nor female, or him following her and experiencing one realistic dream after another. These were all strange things to him. A lot of his professional knowledge was useless. Therefore, for the time being, they could only gather as much information as possible instead of solving the problem. He had to grasp the truth of what she had done. As for the thing that had been attached to her body, no matter what, it was still there. His heart was filled with suspicion. Before everything was clear, he had to suppress these things so as not to burden her. Therefore, Yi Yuxuan was extremely calm, but she sighed faintly in her heart. His face was pale and haggard. There was a faint shadow under his eyes, which was very obvious under the light. Suddenly, a pair of gentle hands, as careful as feathers, landed on his beautiful shoulders. Her fingers caressed his fair neck inch by inch as if she was comforting a child. Her fingertips ran through his dry and smooth hair, and finally she naturally pressed herself against him. She pressed his head into her arms. Wei Wei Bai lowered her eyes, and the look in her eyes was incredibly gentle. Her body was slightly bent, and her long hair fell messily on his back. This was a very warm and protective action. "Why didn't you say you couldn't sleep?" Her voice was low and soft, like fluff, with a fragrance that almost blended into his breath. Although it was a question, it didn't have any offensive power. /t. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.